Welcome to the Hawkszone Rundown. We have an exciting live show for you guys today. It couldn't work out better here because we are in a bye week for the Hawks, and a lot of questions, a lot more questions than answers these last few weeks. And but we got a star-studded lineup tonight. We have Cain from the Hawksnest, Dan Viens from Seahawks Forever, and Jacson Bevens from Cigar Thoughts. And they're going to join us and talk everything Hawks, taking your questions, trying to get answers for you guys. It's just going to be an awesome conversation. So on the other side of the Hawk Zone, here we go.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
And it's run. Get off me.
DK.
Yes, sir.
Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
And Washington's got away. Leon Wilson with a catch. Jackson, Smith, and Jimbo. The Seahawks are going to hold the NFC Championship.
Every year, the NFL does. Is it going to be another 9-8?
Who's going to finish something?
They have to fix the offensive
Part of the
line.
success and part of
Ambition of being the LOB
want to hear. That's trading DK Metcalf.
Let him address it.
This is the Hawkszone Rundown with Ryan and Bryce.
Welcome back to the Hawk Zone. This is an exciting show for us. We are midway through the season here. We're at the midway point. We have a bye. The weather is kind of crappy out. So what better time to do this and do it now with the guys. Fellas, appreciate you joining us, coming on. This is going to be a lot of fun. Let's just go around the table. Brandon, what's going on?
doing well, man. Trying to look for the optimism and silver linings in this season. We've lost 5 of 6 games, and we're all going to be trying to look for that a little bit today. But still feel good about the future of this team, and of course, love our Hawks.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan Viens from Seahawks Forever. What's happening, man?
I was on mute, rookie move. Always good to be with all you guys. I'm just trying to figure out how I got invited to this. There must have been a mistake, but
right.
No, it's great to be surrounded by so much talent and brain power. My voice is struggling a little bit. Just a heads up, I may have to mute myself and hack up some good stuff here along the way. But I've got all my assortment of beverages of different varieties to keep me company. So it's good to be here, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one of our another one of our favorite guests we've had on a few times, Jacson Bevens, Cigar Thoughts. Appreciate you coming in, man.
What up, fellas? Stoked to be here.
And and then you got myself and Bryce coming in. And hey, guys, let's by the way, guys, if anyone tuning in live, we see the numbers coming in. Throw out your questions. We're gonna try to get some of them throughout the show and just have some fun with it. But guys, let's just kick it off right now, man. We're in an interesting spot. 4-5, like Brandon says, we lost 5 of 6. The home losses has been a struggle for sure. And a couple weeks ago, we were saying, hey, we're in first, kind of making a couple little moves there. And now we're in last. That's how kind of tight this division is right now. But knowing what we know and talking a lot of offseason stuff and sort of the expectations that maybe some people have with this team, we're at the midway spot right now. What do you guys think overall, as far as an evaluation concerned right now at this point? Was it something you expected, or where do you guys stand? Brandon, why don't we start with you?
I think you had to go to the historical markers on this and understand you need to be patient, and expecting this kind of season could play out this way. I think there was more hope that this could be a bit of a different situation because you had the draft haul you'd got back for Wilson 2 years ago. You were going into now those guys' third year in that development. You've drafted pretty well the past couple of years. Bad money mostly off the books at this point. So maybe there's a little bit of hope there. There's reason for more optimism than you normally have. Instead, it's kind of shifted a little bit more into what we traditionally would see with a new coach coming in, including our own Coach Carroll 14 years ago. And so that then just requires us, I think, to be patient. But at the same point in time, it also pivots us forward into looking at this conversation in a real way of, wait, are we close? Are we not? Do we maybe have talented players here that just aren't exact fits for both of these two new schemes that want to be run now going forward? And I think that's where I find myself as more now of we're kind of leaning in that direction more of I thought we were going to be good. I thought we were going to be good, though. I thought that he was going to be able to really tap into some advantages that have been left on the table by the staff previously, and to a great degree. Lack of target in the middle of the field, lack of run game to the edges, and we go through the litany of things the prior regime just did not want to do. And I thought that alone would open this up, but it just hasn't. It's going to require that onboarding process.
Yeah, what do you guys think, Jacson? Where do you stand in? And you know, and at the same time, and not, you know, because Bryce and I will sit here, we were bullish, right? We were a little bullish coming into this year, and I think a lot of it had to do with, you know, you look at the past 2 seasons, say, hey, we won 9 games, and thinking that maybe Carroll lost the room, and there is talent, and the, you know, the obvious O-line deficiencies, we sort of knew that coming in. Like Abe Lucas, there was always that hope, but I think a lot of us knew that he probably wasn't going to start the season. So, you know, with a lot of people having these expectations, man, where do you stand sort of at this point of the season?
Yeah, I mean, to me, 2024 was always a diagnostic year. Outside of them being really, really bad or really, really good, I wasn't putting a ton of stock into wins and losses this year as it relates to 2025, 2026. I think it's just when you have that big of a culture shift there, it takes time. And, you know, we all talk about Pete Carroll coming in and changing the culture. That man went 7-9 his first year. It just happened to be good enough to make the playoffs and give these fans a moment. That being said, I was also optimistic. I thought they'd have a winning record this year. I think that's still very possible. What I underestimated is how bad they'd be at the things they're bad at, because I think there's a lot of good players on this team who are having really excellent seasons get erased by massive deficiencies on the offensive line and in run defense.
Yeah, Dan, what are you thinking?
You know, I'm going to echo more of the same sentiment. This test is, or this season has been a real test of me trying to balance, you know, the analytical part of my brain and the fan part of my brain, right? At the beginning of the season, you know, I was optimistic. I'll steal your word. I was bullish, but I said numerous times on the show, wins and losses didn't matter to me as long as I saw the development of a team that could contend moving forward by the end of the season, whatever that looked like. Well, then I got sucked in against some of my better judgment to the 3-0 start and to some of the things I saw, and actually came away from that Monday Night Football Lions loss feeling so good about this team and what they were able to do that night, even without all the guys that were missing on defense, that you know, I got really aggressive about my win-loss projection the rest of the season, and then things kind of went off the rail. So I'm back now. The bye came at a good time, I think. I've kind of personally reset those expectations again, that really it doesn't matter. I keep going back to something that Greg Bell said at the beginning of the season when he was on my show. He said, I think they're going to be a good team, but not until November or December. And so, you know, now we're there and we're going to find out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? I think we talked about that on our show as far as wins and losses wasn't like the you know, the measuring stick, right? And we talked a lot of guys that have been on the show in the offseason was like you just mentioned, right? How is this team looking November, December, and you know, are we on an ascent? How? And I think that's kind of what we want to see, right? I mean, the defense sort of came on, but man, we're going into Santa Clara. Like, we're playing a Niners team that's getting healthy. You got CMC coming back, probably fired up. If he's healthy, ready to go, you got to think that guy's ready to have a game, right? So that's sort of interesting because we're going to be middle November by the time that game kicks off. So that, to me, that's where sort of I want to see, like, how do we finish this season off? You know, like, because even before we come on air here, you mentioned Pete 7-9, 2 years, and benefit of a crappy division, sort of what we have right now. But here's beast mode, and then you beat the Saints. And then it was like, okay, we can build on this, right? And sort of all that 7-9 game out the window because you're like, oh, we might have something here. Is that something we got to see? Maybe is it something we got to see at the end of this year, or is it something where let's give Mike and John a full off season to restructure a little bit? But we, at some point, if it's not end of the year, it's got to be in year 2 where we kind of say, hey, we can build off whatever that is.
2015, when the Atlanta Falcons hired Dan Quinn away from us, and they got him late in the process because the Seahawks made a deep playoff run. And so he didn't get a chance, although he had, I think he had Kyle Shanahan in his back pocket, but he had to assemble a staff late. It was a lot of the same, look of the process that Seahawks had to go through if they wanted Mike Macdonald. They get off to a 5-0 start. Everyone's feeling great. You look back at the end of the season, and those 5 teams finished a collective 10 games under 500. So kind of a similar start, but everyone's feeling good. They go 3-8 the rest of the season to finish 8-8 and miss the playoffs. Then they get a full off season together. Everyone's on the same page. The coaching staff gets to be part of the free agency and draft process, which this coaching staff was not that first year. They go 11-5 year 2, go to the Super Bowl, almost won it, should have won it. So yeah, I'm at the point now where you have to see what a full off season looks like, where everyone's at the starting gate together.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on what Dan's saying here is, it is so easy to get sucked into individual data points with the NFL. And I mean, everyone is familiar with my show or my writing is probably sick of hearing me say that, like, we really, really do got to get 20,000 feet in the air if we're willing to make declarative statements about this team and players on it and the coaching staff. Now, if you say, Geno sucked last game, or, Mike Macdonald made a bad decision or hasn't coached his guys up or whatever, that's one thing. But if you're talking about trading your quarterback or moving on from a coaching staff or whatever, making decisions this early, coming to strong opinions about it before a full offseason with this regime is, I think, crucial. And if your approach to bringing a brand new, like Dan said, lately assembled coaching staff onto a team that got outscored by like 50 points last year, and you're expecting them to be contending for a Super Bowl already, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. This is a 2-year project. Any culture overhaul needs at least 2 years for you to figure out what you got. Now, if we're heading into week 10 of next year and they're 4-5 and they're bottom 3 in offensive line play and they can't stop the run, these issues haven't been addressed. Yeah, okay. Now we got to start talking about whether it's the right decision to do that this year, especially when you consider that it's taken Mike Macdonald 2 years to get his defenses to be great everywhere he's gone. Yeah, I mean, don't rob yourself of the joy of watching this team try and be competitive as they develop into what they're going to be.
Well, and that's something like I've thought about in this hindsight. And like Jacson said, take that 20,000 foot view of it. After the 49ers game, that's kind of what I did. I really looked at this team and where they were going and how it's been assembled. And the one thing for me, like Dan said with the Dan Quinn hire, I even went a little bit farther back and looked at Mike McCarthy when he came into Green Bay after taking over from Mike Sherman. And one thing I think sometimes is lost in this transition from one coach to another is, what was the tenure of that initial coach that he is now stepping in for? Pete Carroll had a certain way of doing things that not everybody in the NFL did. He had success and great success doing it. Trying to come in an offseason when you're a late hire and change that culture when players that have been there, like there wasn't an overhaul of this roster. A lot of it was copy paste from the previous season. Mike Macdonald hasn't had a chance to really get his guys or his input necessarily, I think, into a lot of that. It was kind of, let's take this roster and see what we can do with it. And you're kind of seeing that. And I think, again, like Jacson said, if we're not looking at a team that's in a better situation come week 10 of 2025, then there's major questions that are really going to need to be answered. And I think it's going to go above just the coaching staff. I think that'll be a front office kind of situation of, what are they doing in the scouting department, in the free agency, in the pro, acquisitions department. For me, I look at this team and if they're not a playoff contending team by 2026, like going into the 2026 season, I think there's going to be bigger, hot seats for people to sit on with, is this coaching staff right? Is John Schneider right in, rebuilding this and getting us set back the other way? But, like we talked prior to this show, John Schneider, this is his real first go at being a true GM without having Pete there. It's John's show now. He's hired this staff. He's done this. We need to kind of sit back and go through this. And like for me, a successful end to this season is 2011. Like we look at how 2011, they grew that second half of the year. The defense started to establish its identity in itself. I think that's something I want to see. And for me, it's going to be Can we find pieces on this O-line, whether they're the rookies that we drafted or some guys that start to play better, that we can start to figure out how we're going to solve that plan going forward?
Yeah, I'm the most hopeful guy for the team going forward, but I do think you've got to look potentially at looking at this offseason as maybe a bit of a rebuild to soft rebuild rather than we're just going to add on to these parts. We don't know who the core guys really are. We got talented guys, but I think the difference between talented guys and guys that are part of the core might just be two different things when it all boils down. And then that means you got to give it the time. If it's a requirement that he's got to get his guys in here to run his system right, or Grubb's got to get his system in here to run it right, I think it's become very clear both sides of the ball have not been able to run the full allotment of what they would like to run because they just don't have the guys to run it. And so that's kind of drawn down, I think, to something that's more like a skeleton kind of system on both sides of the ball. And you've got to be able to run your full meal deal to see if it can even work. So this has got to be one that's about patience. I will say when it comes to certain pet things with like John and the offensive line, if he goes through another off season of just patty caking this offensive line and just soft selling it and doing the bare minimum, I'm going to be a little bit my wit's end with him on that because this has been about a 10-year issue here now. And he just will not double in on it. He takes kind of that same approach almost every single off season. But aside from that,
yeah, I mean, talking about John and stuff like that. I mean, he's been the GM now for what are we going on here? Year 15. I mean, so if you look at it like that, how realistic do you think it is? I mean, I'm sort of leaning towards obviously, Mike's gonna be working with them now, so they definitely need to overhaul a couple areas. But how realistic? You mentioned, the O line's obviously the big issue. How realistic is it to really revamp that? Talking about teaching an old dog new tricks kind of thing, because that's not really been his MO. Do you think it's something like maybe ownership's bringing him in and talking with him, or do you think he knows it and he sees it and he really has to maybe change things up a bit? Or like you said, his leash isn't as long as you might once think, maybe even a couple of seasons ago.
I think we're going to find out in a hurry when the offseason starts because he has to see, right? He doesn't have that safety net anymore. He can't share the blame anymore. It's all on him. And so I think he has to see it more starkly than ever. Like his job now solely is on the line based on that one position group. We've seen him overhaul an entire position group successfully. We've seen him do it with the defensive line over the last couple of years. And, he flushed the whole group out 2 years ago and rebuilt it into a unit that we like. The thing on the offensive line that drives me a little bit crazy is first of all, I think they need to decide what they think they are this year. We're going to find out pretty quickly these first couple of games back from the bye because there's some young guys on the roster that I think they need to evaluate, right? If Laken Tomlinson's not your future, but if you like Satawa Lamea, I mean, at some point, he can't be any worse, can he? Or if he can, you got to find that out. I think they also need to decide what type of lineman that they want or that Mike McDonald and Ryan Grubb want because you look at the right guard battle and 2 years ago, they take Anthony Bradford, who's all about traits and not about refinement or technique. And then you turn around the next year and you take Christian Haynes in the third rounder, who's kind of the exact opposite, right? He's a really experienced, technician with lots of starts under his belt. And he's played right guard his whole career, but he's apparently lost the job because he doesn't have enough traits. He's just not physically gifted enough. I think they need to just figure out what kind of lineman they're going to need and then how they're going to acquire them. Connor Williams is another example. I think, they talk about being a physical running team, but that's not Connor Williams. And we're seeing that.
Yeah, I think it's an investment is what it takes. They go from an investment standpoint by the linemen they targeted. That's a good point, Dan. And that, especially with Laken's case, you're going to a spread system and bringing Laken in. That was one you could see coming, and he's been slightly improving, but that's one where you would go, okay, that's not a fit to what Grubb wants to do offensively. That's going to restrict probably Grubb offensively to some degree, not a major degree, but at least a little bit. And so you do need to get the right players that fit both sides of the ball. I think that when it comes to the offensive line, when I've looked at this and looked at the teams that have built great offensive lines, they put the investment into it. They put the resources into it. And whether you want to look at the money spent or the bare minimum draft picks put into it on a, kind of yearly basis, the story kind of remains the same on this one. It's like a Led Zeppelin song. And so just put the investments up the ante up here, double the blinds, and if we do that, I think we'll be surprised at how much more just on that basis alone, the improvement will come.
Yeah. I'm of two minds with this. Without question, John Schneider should be prosecuted for his approach to the offensive line from 2014 through 2021 for sure. But on the other hand, he drafted Charles Cross with a top 10 pick. He drafted Abe Lucas in the second round or on day 2. And he's been excellent when he's played, right? No one foresaw a 1.5 year long injury from him. The splits offensively with Abe Lucas on and off the field have been insane. They went out and they got Connor Williams, and that was like a really good market inefficiency to attack, because you had major need at center. You had a Pro Bowl caliber center whose value was depressed because of a knee injury. And, you know, they drafted Christian Haynes with the 3rd round pick. Like it hasn't been for lack of effort recently. The problem is there's no depth there because you didn't do it for the 9 years prior. You don't have reinforcements when an Abe Lucas gets hurt. And, you know, we had Greg Rosenthal on the show this week, and I asked him to rank the following assets of the Seahawks on a worry meter. 1 being you're not worried at all. 10, you got to make a move right now. And the framing for this question, because I think framing is always super important, was if you're assuming 2024 is a diagnostic year, but you're expecting to compete for a division in 2025 and to be considered a real contender by 2026, what is your worry meter when it comes to each of these people being a part of that process? And we started with McDonald, and he said like a 3.5. And then we went to Gino, and he said a 2. I asked him about DK Metcalf. He said a 1. I asked him about John Schneider. He said 7. And that kind of tracks with where I'm at. I think the way we talk about John Schneider really betrays whether or not we want to see him continue to be the GM, because he's made some really high profile moves that haven't worked out. Right. I mean, we don't need to list them. He's also made some that have been like sensational, trading a 5th for Quandre Diggs. 2010 through 2012. Granted, he's been trading in on that reputation for a long time. That's probably the best 3-year stretch of drafting that we may ever see in terms of AAV produced from consecutive draft classes. He was able to identify Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett and bring them in cheap before they were stars. Lots and lots of moves that have hit. He is on the right side of one of the most lopsided trades in NFL history and the biggest trade in franchise history. He nailed that out of the park. The offensive line still sucks. Linebackers still suck. The decision to try and recreate Jordan Brooks in the aggregate looks terrible now. And, you know, taken as a whole, yeah, give him one more offseason. But if this is where we're at, like I said earlier in the show, at this point next year, yeah, if you don't see your general manager still being your general manager in 2 years, then he's not your general manager right now.
And I'm not putting him on, just for clarity, I'm not saying I've got him on the hot seat. I just think that he's got an approach he takes. And Jackson, I think you laid it out well.
Oh, I do. I have him firmly on the hot seat.
Yeah, it's because it's, and that's, I think it's fair, because it is, the way you put it is right. This has been complete dysfunctional in the way they put the group together. And I'm not as kind as you are even in the last few years, because even in that, I see an Abraham Lucas, this guy looked like he had 1st round type talent on tape that went to the 3rd round. You know, did that happen because of a medical issue? Was there something with that knee? Because I think that knee very well potentially was something that they might have even had walking in the house they were aware of. And if that's the case, you came into this offseason and you went Laken Tomlinson. That's a low-end signing. That's just like your Luke Jokels or a variety of other guys, Austin Blythe and Evan Browns that we can go through, that was never giving you quality prior. You went back down that same road again. You went to George Fant, which was just like a Laken Tomlinson, where, again, value-based signing, very minimal amount of money, because you kind of knew Lucas wasn't going to play. And now, in retrospect, we know that they probably were pretty understanding this was going to be a half-season situation. And that's where I say, to me, it's this bare minimum approach. Even now, even the last couple of years they've gone out with, Connor Williams coming off a torn ACL. It's not just a knee injury, but a torn ACL where he wasn't even 100% at the end of training camp. And I just go through that stuff and I go, how was that a plan in place that you thought was going to work, both on paper and then the way you were going to play that out? And that's the part on top of misses like Bradford and Oluwatimi or Satu Lemea that can't get on the field. And those aren't real high drafted guys, but on top of Haynes, where are the guys you're picking to get value from as well? The Rams got a guy that's playing center right now. It's like a 5th round center playing pretty decent for them. Where are those kind of picks you're finding as well in addition to that? And that's to me where he just doesn't put I don't like the Cowboys and their approach, but one thing the Cowboys do a good job of building their offensive line. What they do this past draft, bam, they go Guyton first round, they come back to Cooper Beebe the second round. And that's why they build up those great offensive lines. Eagles, same kind of way. You got to put the resources into it, and true resources, and not just kind of go up to the line and just sort of step up and toe the edge with your big fat toe and go, okay, that's good. That's about enough there. We'll be fine.
Well, at a certain point too, we have to spread a little bit of the accountability around, right? I mean, we heard so much about the Scott Huff's reputation, right? When he was hired and he came with Ryan Grubb, and we need to see him. Can he develop players? Because one of the things that frustrates me is not just the investment in some younger offensive linemen that haven't panned out, but the commitment of a roster spot to them, right? Last year, Raekwon O'Neal and McClendon Curtis, they poached both those guys off practice squads at the cut down to 53. None of them contribute, but they carry him on the 53 all season long because they saw enough in them. They didn't want to risk losing them to waivers. Neither developed into a player even worth a spot on this year's roster. They go out and draft a bunch of other guys, and now they're doing the same thing. We were all a little bit surprised with how many of those young offensive linemen they kept on the 53 with Jarrell and Lemea and even Jalen Sundell. At least one of those 3 guys needs to develop into a player, or you're just, what are we doing here, right? If you're not developing them, then we need to, reassess what we're doing in the offseason. Because we see other teams go out and fix their offensive lines in the offseason without spending massive money at the top of the market, without drafting guys in the top 10. The New York Giants did it this offseason. They dramatically improved their offensive line without investing a ton of money into it, just by getting the right players.
I do want to say there's absolutely, Dan is 100% correct that there is proof of concept for building an offensive line without massive investment. I would say teams that don't invest massively overwhelmingly do not have good offensive lines. And I would say that if you were to poll the fan bases of all 32 teams, you'd be lucky if you got fewer than 25 of them saying that they were, unhappy with their offensive line. So the fact of the matter is there's 160 offensive linemen starting in the NFL every week. It's a position with a massively high injury rate. There aren't 50 good offensive linemen in the NFL. And I think that at full strength, Seattle has 2 or 2.5 of them. I do think the approach recently has been better.
I kind of wonder, just one last little point. I kind of wonder if maybe it took being this bad for Schneider to change his approach and really,
that's the hope, right?
Because he did exactly what we're talking about. He did it with the Super Bowl team, right? Go back and look at the guys that were starting on that line. You have Russell Okung, who was a top 10 draft pick, and then a bunch of dudes that were either, James Carpenter was kind of a failure, but they moved him to guard and got the most out of him. And then some other guys on that line that were sort of waiver wire pickups and plan B free agents and undervalued guys. So it worked once. I think he's still
2013, Seattle had the highest percentage of their salary cap paid to the offensive line of any team in the NFL. So if we're looking for what's worked in the past, that's where it is.
But I mean,
that's on top of
J.R. Sweezy, Breno Giacomini, Paul McQuiston were on that line, right? Like the money was into a couple of guys, and they paid some guys mid-range money, but they were right about it. They got the right guy.
Real quick though, they also went past that line. To your guys' point on this, you had Robert Gallery you were spending money on who didn't play. But that was a guy that was, hey, we're going to make this a big point. We're going to build this thing up so that, hey, we got backups we can go to, who can start like a Paul McQuiston or even a Breno. But we're going to keep doing that. They had the guy they took in the 3rd round out of Wisconsin who flamed out. He was too much of a partier. Moffitt. But that was a guy at the same time who could have been theoretically, if his head was on straight, on that same roster at that time. They pushed it past the line, and that brought about a line that was actually workable and functionable.
Also, it's worth noting that back then you could block different, and Seattle had Tom Cable as their offensive line. And basically, Cable turned every game into a cage match where he would engage a blocker with one or a defender with one offensive lineman and cut the dude while he was engaged with a different one. The Seahawks 2012 to 2014 were cut blocking at the highest rate in the NFL, and you were allowed to do it. And as soon as that offensive line had to play straight up and you couldn't play dirty pool anymore, they started sucking.
So that's one thing I was going to touch on in the whole thing about this offensive line discussion. I agree. I think John Schneider owns a lot of the blame. I think exactly what Jacson touched on. The NFL was a little bit different when we had our successful run game in that early LOB era. I think Russell Wilson also masked a lot of those problems, as we all know, watching him run around and extend plays because he could do things other quarterbacks couldn't do at the time. The other thing that I look at is I've started to dive back more into what colleges did in offensive schemes back then in that era. And one thing that wasn't as prevalent back then, it was there, but it wasn't, is the RPO and the spread game that all these NFL teams have gone to and all these colleges have gone to now in some aspect or another. Oregon really was the team that had mastered at that point with Chip Kelly because he kind of was the one that had really dove into it and gone to it. At that point in time, though, you will watch Big Ten football back then. It was still I formation, 5-7-step drop pass pros. You know, there were a lot more offensive linemen coming out at that time, out of the Wisconsins, the Michigans, the Ohio States, that were being coached and developed correctly. And I think that's one thing John's alluded to, even in a way, is you look at a guy like Christian Haynes that we took this year. Christian Haynes has the build you want. He has it, but he's built for a certain style of game in the, wide zone or the zone blocking scheme. He struggles when it comes to being a power scheme. And that's where I think for us, one thing, if you look at this offensive line, is it's kind of this mishmash of pieces, and we don't really have an offensive line identity. We're not a power gap duo running team that's going to smash you in the mouth. And we're not really committing fully to the zone. We're trying to be this multiplicity on our O-line, but the problem is you don't have the pieces for that. That'd be fine if you had a guy that's, okay, he's the size that can play gap power duo ball and run it down your throat, but he's also got nimble enough feet to get out and, get onto a linebacker in the wide zone game. It's just something I look at where I think there's so many contributing factors, and I think our O-line coaching too and development of O-line players, like Tom Cable, once the cut block was gone, his O-line scheme and blocking style just faded away. He went to Oakland. It was never any better. We bring in Mike Solari. Mike Solari was kind of in the same light when he was with San Francisco. They did a lot of the same things with Jim Harbaugh and that group. He struggled a bit too in developing O-linemen. And then you'd watch guys go like a Mark Lewinsky go off to Indianapolis, and all of a sudden he looks half decent. I think a lot of it has to, and like to Dan's point earlier, we got to see what Scott Huff can do. Can he actually develop linemen, or is he someone that's reaped the benefit of being at a college that gets decent players in and they have enough skill set? Like, what is his development process? How does he identify linemen? And that's something I think we're going to have to wait and see. And that's where this offseason coming up, it's going to be really interesting to see. But I'm in the firm boat of John Schneider and that scouting department has to do better. And not just in the draft, but in free agency and identifying good offensive linemen. Not, hey, we're going to scrape the barrel with a Lincoln Tomlinson. Like, let's actually allocate our money correctly going forward. Like, Noah Fant, love the guy. Think he's a great person and a great player in a certain type of offense. We're not using him enough to justify the contract that we gave him. We're just not. He's not Noah Fant's not someone you circle on your, piece of paper every Sunday and go, how many targets are we getting to Noah Fant today? We can use that money that we pay there to potentially maybe invest in another guard or somebody else that might be able to help that offensive line.
And what about utilizing potentially a trade? There's three methods here. It's free agency, draft, or trade. We've only traded for a quality offensive lineman once since 2017, and that was Dwayne Brown. We actually overpaid for him. We were going to give Jeremy Lane up on that trade. He failed the physical. We had to kick an extra third-round pick back in, so we ended up seemingly at that time kind of quasi-overpaying for a guy 33 years old. Move worked out. It was a success story for us. So if we have such a hard time drafting, if that's a John hole at this point, that would be maybe another method to utilize to be able to improve this line.
John seems to really get he seems to overreact to failures in some ways, right? We saw, after what happened with Malik McDowell, I feel like it completely changed his outlook when it came to trading down and targeting certain types of character players. And I kind of think it might have happened on the offensive line. Like, he's made big swings before. Like, these people that say that, he's been negligent from day one. He tried to sign Chris Dealman, offered him $48 million to get him away from the Chargers in the prime of his career. He turned it down, wanted to stay in San Diego at the time. He tried to get TJ Lang. He ended up signing for $28 million to stay in Detroit. But then the Gabe Jackson deal, right? They trade for Gabe Jackson. They extend him. They give him legitimate money, and it doesn't work out. And I feel like sometimes when that happens, John goes, okay, never gonna make that mistake again. Right. And he gets a little overcautious.
Yeah. So what do you guys think then overall, if you kind of look at it, like, do you think, this talent that, we talked about this team in the offseason, like there's pieces. Now, is it the right pieces? Well, I don't know. It's yet to be known. That's going to be an offseason. But you think if they trend the way they trend, if we, go on a bit of a losing streak and we're completely out of this thing in a few weeks, and you just don't see much improvement, is it a case maybe if we just focus on the O-line and still have DK around and still have a lot of those pieces around that, some cornerstones, if you want to call it, do you think that would be good enough for you guys? Or you think it's more, hey, there's a lot more issues here to address, and you might see a real aggressive offseason with John and Mike there now working with them? How are you guys looking at that?
I think that with John, for all of the criticism, and again, this is coming from someone who believes Schneider should be firmly on the hot seat.
Yeah.
He's gotten a lot of parts of this roster right, and they're all at the periphery, right? I think he's got quarterback right. I think he's got one of the most talented carriers of the football next to him in the backfield. I think he has one of the best receiving cores in the NFL. I think that's inarguable. I think there's a lot of talent on the defensive line and a lot of talent in the secondary. There's strengths to this team. They're just getting their knees chopped out because they're so bad at linebacker and so bad at offensive line. So, Ryan, it's a great question. I think Seattle is uniquely situated to pour every available resource into just two things. Every other team is trying to sprinkle their assets around their roster to fill holes and improve every position group that they have. Seattle do that. I think they have some very obvious extension decisions to make. To me, they're not debatable with some of their best players. But that's going to leave a ton of money and a ton of draft picks to go after these guys. And you know what? Fuck it. Overspend. I don't give a shit. Go overspend. Try that.
It's tough. I think there's a case to be made too that they've, if he's intended to build a good offensive line the last couple of years or supplement it and in any way, there's been some bad luck too. When they've drafted high, they haven't necessarily had guys fall into their lap the last 2 years, when they had Devin Witherspoon at 5. If there was an elite lineman there, as there usually is at the 5th spot, maybe that would have been the choice, but there wasn't a guy. Right. And this last year didn't really fall that way in the first round either. I mean, we all wanted the kid out of UW, but then the knee thing came up and we found out he wasn't even on their draft board, and we can debate some of the other guys that went after him too. But I think again, this year, if take a look at the free agent class, there's not a lot of dudes there, right? There's Trey Smith is going to get a shit ton of money because he's really the only stud young guard that's going to hit the market. If indeed he does, he probably will, because Kansas City probably can't afford to franchise him. Probably going to get like Robert Hunt type money. You want to go after that guy, go do it. But there aren't a lot of other guys. And you can't just draft, I get a lot of people that say, well, just draft all the linemen. Well, then you're throwing a bunch of young guys out there, and we've seen how that looks too. So, it got to be some, maybe if you draft high enough, you get a guy, right? There's a couple of tackles that look like top 10-ish, but not many. But you got to go out and you got to find some guys in free agency too that just have a track record of getting it done.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. The cool position that Seattle finds themselves in is all those positions that I mentioned that I think John Schneider has done a good job with. Those are the ones that you have to draft the highest. You need interior OL and off-ball linebacker. You can find top 5 players in those classes on day 2 every single year. You do not need to be you don't need to be picking super high in the draft to get a really good guard. You don't need to be picking super high in the draft to get a really good off-ball linebacker. Like Seattle can address these positions in the draft without needing to stretch their capital to do it.
Yeah, I think there's 3 different ways to get it done: trade, free agency, and the draft, and you can utilize all 3 of those methods. You basically have mainly only utilized the draft outside of value-based signing for veteran free agents that are on their last legs.
You're right.
A la Gabe Jackson, George Fant, Laken Tomlinson. We can go through the list. So you avoid going that, put the actual assets into it, and you can get the returns. I think Abraham Lucas, to Jackson's point about this, is a big hinge point on this as well. Because if Lucas comes back and he can solidify down to what he was through his first 10 games when he was there in the rookie year, and that offense had Geno at an MVP level, by the way, at that time, then that does change the complexity of what you got to deal with on this line, right? You got the 3 interior points you got to deal with this offseason. If he's not good, if that knee's not right, now you're rebuilding 4/5 of your offensive line in a single offseason. Which, because I don't think we can count. I still am hopeful for Haynes. I'm not saying buster, but we've seen what we've seen on the tape with him so far. He may develop, he may not. I don't think you can count on that and ride or die with that going into next year. Going, oh, year 2 it'll be better. I think this is again going back, pushing past that line a little bit. But that's where that for me is a little bit of the hinge point: is does Lucas come in? How much of this do I really got to take care of? I like the depth a little bit going forward. Drell, I think, will round out to be that sort of Stone Forsythe swing tackle in the future. But what about how much of this are we going to have to deal with this offseason? And I think I'm fine with Jackson's plan too. And you want to go with linebacker and line and just hammer those. I think the team would be perfectly well suited to be better for it.
And Brandon's absolutely right about the importance of Abe Lucas. And when Abe Lucas has started and played entire games, which, albeit isn't a huge sample size, but whatever, it's enough to go off of. The Seahawks have averaged 29 points per game. That would be good for 4th in the NFL right now. They would be that 29 points per game is on par with what the Bills and the Commanders are doing, just behind the Ravens. Like, they're outscoring a lot of good offenses when they have Abe Lucas.
Like, that line got better when he came back last year, even though it was evident from the moment he stepped on the field that he wasn't healthy. He wasn't even anywhere close to 100%.
He's worth half a second to Geno, and that's everything.
Yeah. The best talk was
Stone Forsythe still leading the league in pressures. He's been on IR for 2 weeks.
Nice. Yeah, that's the thing, because I think we all agree, like, Lucas is an absolute stud, but I can't remember who just brought up the point, but he is first round talent, but somehow you get him in the 3rd. I mean, it wouldn't be hard to believe that they knew there were some issues, but it's sort of like, hey, let's take a flyer on this. This guy's first round. Maybe that knee will straighten out when he gets in the league, and we can just.
Oh, that's lucky. Good. That's good risk reward process, though.
No, for sure. But I just think when you look at it, because my biggest thing with Abe is, like, even if he comes back, how long does he stay on the field? And I think you got to look at that, right? Because I agree. Like, when we've seen him healthy, you're excited. Like, of course, there's a reason we want Abe back. I mean, he makes a huge difference for Geno and that whole machine. And so, you kind of look at it like, when do you address that issue as well? Like, I mean, to me, I think I look at it like, if he comes back healthy, but then he has another setback. I mean, that, Brandon, you mentioned 4/5. I think that's when it does start. I think if he goes out again, if he comes back for 2 games and he's out, I mean, we've seen, I don't know what Fant's issue is with his knee, but again, hey, he's ready to go. 3 series later, you're like, with Jarrell's on the field, right? Like, it was like, okay, and that just maybe it's just chronic stuff that you get worried about. So that's just the fear, I think, with Hawks fans is like, even if this guy comes back, can he stay relatively healthy? So, and then when do you might have to start even addressing, that issue with that side of the offensive line as well.
The biggest acquisition the Seahawks could make next offseason would be if Abe Lucas comes back in the next few weeks and he's healthy.
Right.
Period. If not, then I think that's your number one draft priority. You're not going to get a right tackle in free agency. There just aren't available this year, or you're going to have to give up the house to get one if anyone's even willing to trade one. There are a couple of guys near the top of this draft. And the other part of that is if Abe Lucas comes back, as you say, Ryan, and he plays a game or two or pulls a George Fant, plays 2 series and he's out again, then you're probably only winning 6 games anyway. So you're probably looking at drafting high enough if you want a Kelvin Banks or you want a Bill Campbell, you might be in position to take that dude. So those two things kind of fit together like a glove.
All right, guys. So I'm going to pose this question here. Is the current assembled staff in need of a full offseason together, or should there be some changes to the staff in the offseason? Do we truly believe that it's just they didn't get enough time together because of their lack of experience in their positions, or does there need to be some tweaks to this staff in 2025?
I don't think you've gotten the talent to fit to what the coaching staff wants to do on both sides of the ball to make a proper assessment. I think it's completely okay to make questions about the offensive line coach and whether he's right, or Alan Durd as defensive coordinator. I know he's kind of just there by title anyway, because it's basically McDonald. But I think that when I look at both of these sides of the ball, we just saw McDonald last week really for the first time starting to unleash that Baltimore Ravens, stack front, simulated pressures, a lot of stuff going on at the line of scrimmage prior to the snap, a lot of moving parts. He's really kept things pretty rudimentary, four-man down linemen. So same thing with the offense, where I just think with Grubb, I don't think he can run to the edges, for instance, because of the pass, because of the run blocking, the penetration that gets on in there. I think it's also with, sometimes what you get the blocking at the edges with the receiving core at times, where I know DK is kind of is beastly in this way, but unfortunately Jackson and Tyler, you don't have guys on the edges that can block. And if you're going to go pitch plays, you're going to go outside zone. I've got to have my receivers on the edge run block. Wasn't that the big thing with Shanahan that we heard with him with Ayuk initially? Was Ayuk got in the doghouse? Why? Because he wouldn't run block. Now Ayuk's a monster as a run blocker. Juwan Jennings a monster as a run blocking. You've got to have those guys that put their hat on a hat out there, or else you're just limited to go A and B gap power runs all day, and you're going to live in there. And that's where we've had to live in the run game at time, thus not getting the most out of Kenneth Walker as well, because he's best out on the edges.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that too. I mean, I'll just echo that. Like, I think it's you do like with Grubb, right? It goes back to the O-line. We have to see, because I think we like Grubb. At the beginning of the year, came in like, hey, let's target DK, let's get our number one guy involved, let's have a bit of a mix and match, and it just, that O-line just been so bad. And like Jackson, you mentioned, Gino, you think he's the guy. I mean, the pressure rate's been insane. We saw, we all watched the Rams game. You can argue some of the decision making, but it's playing behind that line. It's how do you judge Grubb entirely? And and to be fair too, we're only at the halfway mark. I think that maybe that question, it's a little easier to answer at the end of the season. If it's, I just think we have to see something. Like the defense was looking better, so that's a trend in the right direction. The Niners game is going to be fun with this 2 weeks off to kind of see where we're at. Because it's interesting, like any logical fan, right? Like if we come in with CMC and we somehow come out with a win, it's all of a sudden we start talking different ways, right? So it's, we'll see what happens though.
Yeah, I think it's a little too early to tell on that staff. Like you have to give them a little more time, and we'll know more by the end of the year. And I know a few weeks ago, a lot of people were criticizing Jay Harbaugh and the performance of the special teams, but they've done some really cool things the last couple of weeks. The coverage has been great. They get the block punt, and these guys, literally, most of them had never worked together or didn't even know each other. When Schneider was at the combine and he was joking about how they had to stay back in Seattle to set up practice plans, but also get to know each other. He wasn't really joking. Like they really did have to. And I don't think you can underestimate that, right? I do think maybe they add to the staff. Bryce and I were talking about this the other day. The Seahawks are one of the only teams these days that doesn't have a run game coordinator. And a lot of criticism of Ryan Grubb lately because of the performance of the offense. But I just saw a chart the other day that the Seahawks are among the league leaders in how often or how successful they are in empty backfield. Despite the fact that when they go empty, which they're going a lot, teams know that the run game's not a threat, play action's not a threat. It's like the one thing they've decided they could do well, and they're leaning into it. The team know it's coming, and they're still able to succeed at it like that. We've seen that Ryan Grubb has that in his tool belt, right? But the run concepts, right, in overtime, the third and fourth down calls on short yardage, and just not really being creative and not executing the blocks properly. I wonder, they brought Leslie Frazier in to kind of to kind of oversee and be a right-hand man and a sounding board for Mike Macdonald as a veteran presence for a new coach. Maybe a more experienced guy in the run game to come in on offense and kind of help out Ryan Grubb in that aspect. I wouldn't mind seeing that.
Jackson, your thoughts?
I mean, like I said earlier, I'm kind of, and this is not me avoiding the question. This is me trying to be as honest as possible. I'm punting my answer until this point next year. Yeah, of course they deserve an off season together. It would be a massive overcorrection to give up on this staff. Unless, if they finish 5-12 and they've been outscored by 100 points. All right, let's talk about it. That's not really what's happening. I mean, they've been competitive in every game, really, except for the 49ers game. And even the Lions loss, even the Giants loss, those are technically 2-score losses. Jason Myers' field goal against the Giants goes through instead of getting blocked for a touchdown. This team is probably 5, and everything else is exactly the same. This team is probably 5-4, and it'd be an ugly win and whatever. Look, they don't malfunction in the inside the 5-yard line twice against the Bills and malfunction in the red zone 3 times against the Rams. This is a different team. It's not a coaching thing to me yet.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's interesting with the malfunctioning, because I think that's what we're seeing, right? Where there's a lot of malfunctioning, and you mentioned yet, because, and that's the thing, right? What if we get to this point? You mentioned 5 wins, whatever, and the malfunction continues. Like that's to me what you really have to see get cleaned up, and because then it's hard to say how is that not a coaching thing. Like if we go the full schedule and we're still snapping over quarterbacks' heads, and we're taking just undisciplined stuff happening, and just everything that we've seen. The first snap of the season was that an over the head, or was that an interception? Whatever it was, for first series, Gino comes out pick, right? And okay, getting the nerves out of the system. But now we're in week. We've played 9 games, and we got a bye week now, and that was the thing. That was the best game we've seen them play, is coming out of the mini bye, right? They go down to Atlanta, and you're like, okay, that Mike's had some time to figure some stuff out after that crazy 3-game stretch, and we played our best game of the season on the road. So we've seen the capabilities, like you said, if this team can clean up, and so for me, that's kind of my biggest thing that I want to see in Santa Clara, whether we win or lose, is how clean and how complete of a game can we play down in Santa Clara. Obviously we're going to be an underdog going in there in their house. I don't remember the last time we beat the Niners, but just be competitive and put a clean game together. And that's, I think, what people are sort of waiting to see consistently with this squad.
So it's funny for me. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, that's why I think I feel so much better about the potential for the second half of the season, because of the performance on Sunday by the defense, even though that loss was gut wrenching. I mean, that's a game they should have won, and it was really painful to witness it live. But I felt like, and you and I talked about this, Bryce, there was a different tone, I thought, in Mike Macdonald's rhetoric that week. He just seemed more comfortable with where he was at. I think he's had to learn how to be behind the podium and do all these press appearances and everything. And at times he kind of seemed a little overwhelmed and a little nervous about it. I thought he had a much stronger tone last week, more conviction about what he thought they were going to do. And then they went out and executed it on Sunday, and that defense looked completely different. I think if we had gone into the bye and given up 180 yards rushing again to the Rams, and Kyron Williams ran all over us, I think we'd some people would be in panic mode, and we'd be talking in a different tone. But that alone. So now I want to see that applied to the rest of the roster, right? See if we can get some other things fixed too.
So I've gone back and I've watched a lot of what Ryan Grubb's called. I've watched every game now, and broadcast view and all 22. And the one thing, and I kind of mentioned it before we jumped on to do the show, is I'd be very interested to know how much of Mike Macdonald's playbook and what he wants to run, and how much of what Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff want to run is actually being used or called. Because when I look at Ryan Grubb, he is kind of doing what we've all been craving Seahawk offensive coordinators to do, which is attack every blade of the field. You look at, Jackson Smith and Jigba's game this past weekend, like he was catching the ball all over their field. There wasn't an area that he wasn't really targeted, whether it was up the middle in the seam game, or it was on the corner routes or whatever. He's done the same with
it was legit a Justin Jefferson Cooper Cup route chart.
It was all over the place, and it was great to see. And so that's where, for me, when I look at this question, and when the first losses started happening, we started to see some of these struggles. I started to go, oh, like maybe I've had a chance to kind of just dive back into it, take Jackson's 20,000-foot view of this offense and this coaching staff, and look at it and go, I don't think they're able to do a lot of the things they want to do, whether it's in the run game and be creative with misdirection and motion, because they can't trust the O-line to hold up. Like, we're one of the most shotgun-based offenses in the NFL. And when you look at teams that are successful, and there's two offensive coordinators that I really like watching right now. One is, surprisingly, Arthur Smith with Pittsburgh and what he's doing. And the other is Ben Johnson in Detroit. And what they do is their mix of shotgun to under center, and their run game mixes in that, and their pass game and their motion. But I think we can't do any of the under center stuff because we don't trust our O-line is going to hold up. And I think that's what Ryan Grubb's gone to is, okay, we have to be back 5 yards so we at least have a shot at being somewhat successful and lean into the empty set stuff and the throwing the ball over the field. So I think Ryan Grubb's what we want. I think Ryan Grubb is hamstrung by what he's got on offensive to work with in the offensive line. And I think the same can be said in some respects on the defensive side with our lack of continuity in the inside linebacking core. And that's one thing, like how Jacson said, it took 2 years for Mike McDonald everywhere he's been to get the defense to work and to function and to get really good. But the biggest thing, even at Michigan, was the recruitment of top inside linebackers for his system. He goes to Baltimore, getting Raekwon Smith, who elevates Patrick Queen. I think Ernest Jones might be that guy. I really do. Watching him play in week 2 now of him being here, his play was much better. His fits were much better. I think that's going to be the driving force. Like Pete Carroll's teams are always driven off the safeties and the secondary. I think defensively for us, it's going to be off the inside linebackers and how good that unit is. Now, whether Tyrese Knight steps in and eventually replaces Dotson and it's Knight and Jones running the show, I don't know. But I think that's one area that we're going to see develop is how do the inside linebackers play going forward the rest of this season? And I think that's where we got to look with this coaching staff and say, let's give them a full offseason, let them get into the whole grime and, gears of it all, and go from there. And we'll see in 2025 what this looks like. And I think Jackson's point of week 10 next year, if we're in the same situation next year, there's more things that are obviously an issue that need to be dealt with. But let's jump into this because we've had a bunch of these come in through the first, 45 minutes to an hour of the show. So let's get to some viewer Q&A. I've got a couple of these start already. So let's go with this one first. MWM. Any of you surprised the Seahawks stayed quiet on the trade deadline day, especially keeping some of their one-year contract players?
No, they're out 2 games out of first place. They've not shown you a team that's either bad nor great this year, which if you're going to be a buyer or seller, you need to be in that lane, I think, one way or the other. I think what the data was telling them about this year is let it play out and see where it stands. And you're in it, and it's not saying you think you're going to get, but hey, there's a chance, and let's just see where it all finishes out at. Not to mention, let's also remember they don't have a lot of money to spend next year with the salary cap. So one-year contract players that'll do to be free agents are very likely end up being rerouted into the compensatory system because it'll all be a net gain by how it's set up, at least at the moment. It may not end up that way, but with the contract extensions we have to sign in-house as well, all of that money, whatever we're going to work through, will be basically gone at that point. So I think they're going to try to work that angle of it as well.
Well, because you didn't make a move on deadline day, they made their moves. They got Roe Robinson Harris and they got Ernest Jones. They just did it. They just did it early.
Yeah.
Yep. That was the exact point that I was going to make.
All right. So Hawks fan Matt says, would this team as presently constructed be any better if they had hired Ben Johnson?
All right. I want to take this one.
Go for it, Jackson.
Oh, is 0% chance that they would have hired Ben Johnson unless it was as their head coach. So would they be better if Ben Johnson was their head coach instead of Mike McDonald? I'm pretty hesitant to say yes. Would he be better than Ryan Grubb? I mean, I don't know. Yeah, maybe, probably. He's got, outside of maybe Philadelphia and Baltimore and Detroit, or Philadelphia and Baltimore and 49ers, he's got the best. I think the Lions have the best offensive personnel in the NFL. They got the best offensive line, extremely capable quarterback. an insane collection of skill position players and a defense they can count on to keep them in situations where their entire playbook is open. Ben Johnson turned down a head coaching job. Ben Johnson, this is a crazy stat. Ben Johnson is the only offensive coordinator who was the offensive coordinator of their current team at the beginning of the 2022 season.
Wow.
The turnover for offensive coordinators in this NFL is insane. He is the only one that's been there for 2 consecutive years working on his third. So I don't want Ben Johnson over Mike McDonald. Do I want him over Ryan Grubb? Yeah, sure. You're going to pay him $10 million to be your offensive coordinator?
But again, is he going to be able to succeed any more than Ryan Grubb has with this collection of talent on the offense?
No way to know.
Yeah. That's a tough one.
And also, you look at Ben too, and you might think, like you mentioned, maybe he looks at it too, like, hey, I got unfinished business here in Detroit. Like I have a good thing going here, and like you said, you come over here with this offensive line, and you're supposed to be this offensive guru. And I think hindsight's 20/20 as well. You look at what we were looking at and it said, hey, we need to clean this defense up. We have to be better. We've been last in the run or close to last the last couple seasons. It's just been trending bad the last 6 years. So we were confident with Mike, and we still are. We're, like you said, just we don't give him an off season. I think that's the biggest thing. We all revert back to that. Give these guys a full off season, and then you can kind of see how he has his guys, plus then some of that leadership might come out. It's just, I don't think I couldn't see Ben being any differently.
I don't think any offensive guru going with this offensive line as it's currently constructed is going to get jack diddly dandy out of it past what has been gotten out of it. I also think with Ben, he did that whole "no, I rejected Washington" thing after the interview, and I got a bit of the impression on that was that he didn't exactly knock that interview out of the park, and that was a little bit of him like being on a date with a girl, and you're like, oh, this date's not going anywhere, and then you call her right after, and you're like, hey, I don't think we're going to need to do anything. So I don't know if Washington was really going to hire him necessarily, and I think he's a bright mind, but I think he's also starting to get into that elevated place a little bit from Jackson's reasons that there's so few of these guys out there now because they all get plucked to become head coaches if they are good almost immediately. That he is one of those kind of bright guys like Slowick out there at Houston as well. And so, he does get a little bit sometimes. I think he's a good coach, but I don't think he's
and the petals are falling off of the Bobby Slowick rose too, because they're having massive offensive line issues.
Yeah, that's a great point. But then to your point, I'm glad you mentioned that because you see the CJ. I know we're going to talk about Geno in a second, but you see that CJ Stroud discussion going in the same place the Geno discussion has gone in recent weeks with that offensive line eroding there with Houston and with their offense going. That's with Nico Collins out as well. Oh, DK was out last. You can see the little bit of the connection of how supporting cast matters.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing for me, if you really look at, some of these guys that have now been head coaches, gone back to coordinators, like Arthur Smith and what he's doing in Pittsburgh, as much as people gave him shit for not being able to get Kyle Pitts functioning, he seems to have turned Russ into what Russ wasn't in Denver. With a lot of the stuff he's asking Russ to do in Pittsburgh, Russ is kind of coming back around to what we knew Russ to be a little bit. He's hitting the deep ball. He's being, the run game. He's revived Najee Harris down there. They developed, some O-linemen in Pittsburgh. Like Arthur Smith may be a guy that gets another opportunity here in a year or two to be a head coach again, because like Jacson said, as soon as you show success as an offensive coordinator, they want to pluck you because it's kind of the hot trend to do. And so we'll have to see how this kind of shapes up. But I'm not so sold that Ben Johnson would have been any better. I think Mike McDonald has the right makeup of a head coach in his demeanor, and how I think he's just going to get better with handling the ups and downs of being a head coach. It's a big change from being a coordinator. You answer to everybody, and you're not really coaching. Well, in his case, he is still coaching the defense, but you're coaching the coaches and how to help them through their struggles throughout whatever's going on. I think he's going to get the hang of that going forward. And maybe, if they do, like we talked about earlier with the staff, maybe they bring in a couple more veteran coaches that might have, maybe a little bit more wisdom for him to bounce things off of if they do make any changes at all in the upcoming offseason. But here's another one from Corey. I would trade DK before the draft. Paying top of the market at wide receiver is crazy, and DK is good but not great. Who wants to take this one?
I bet
Jackson's the one who leaned away, so we'll let Jackson go.
I think, yeah, go for it. I think we're all leaning away, but yeah, Jackson hit it.
I was about to recuse myself from this, from this answer.
I think Jackson's going to end up covering for my answer as well. So go for it.
All right. You know, one of the things about doing what we all do is the people who know us in life, when they see us, you know, they know us through other things, professionally, personally. They want to get our position on, you know, Seahawks topics, right? Yep. You got a podcast. What do you think about this? And I feel like when you get enough of those questions, you look for some litmus. At least I do. I look for some litmus test questions, like, do I want to engage in further sports conversation with you? And should you trade DK Metcalf is one of those questions. All right, fuck it. I'm going to rant.
Go for it.
Go, baby.
You want to talk about age-adjusted production. I'm not talking about metrics. I'm talking about raw, throbbing volume stats at the wide receiver position. DK Metcalf is like a top 15 wide receiver by the time he's 25 of all time. He has done that on an insanely low target share for wide receiver one. You can ask anybody that's ever been on my show. You can ask any opposing defensive coordinator, what is plan number one when you are getting ready to face the Seattle Seahawks? It's to take away number 14. You can look at just screenshots of where safeties are lined up when DK Metcalf is on the field and when he's not. He is drawing top shadow coverage and half a safety on every single route. And you know what? He was second in the NFL in receiving yards before the injury. And he's actually not even seeing that much higher of a target share than he has in the past. He is an exceptional blocker. He is a leader in the locker room. He is respected across the board by players older than him. He is cool, man. He's good for business. He sells tickets. He sells primetime games. He sells jerseys. DK Metcalf is a game changer. Paying top of the market at wide receiver is not crazy. Corey, I don't know you, man. You might be the shit. You probably are. To say that paying top of the market at wide receiver is crazy is just flat out. I reject that on its premise. DK Metcalf changes everything about this team. And the idea that somehow you're just going to recreate him in the aggregate, okay, let's say you get a first rounder for him. All right, that's going to be a late first. What are the chances? Let's look at all the receivers, because you're gonna have to take a receiver. Lockett ain't long for this.
Lad McConkey.
Okay, yeah, sure. Maybe you get Brian Thomas Jr. late in the first round from a contender. Maybe. Hit rate again super low, back half of the first, and you're committing real money to that guy too. And all of a sudden, you know, let's say you hit on a Brian Thomas and he's 80%, 90% of what DK is. Well, all right. What's the chances that you take the assets that you get, the savings that you get, and you're able to recreate the impact, both measurable and immeasurable, from DK Metcalf with that? It's low. You do not, this is not Madden. This is not Dynasty Fantasy Football. You do not get better by getting rid of your best players. You have a young player who is exceptional at one of the most important positions in NFL across the board, but specifically to this team, specifically to how a team with no offensive line is running their offense. DK Metcalf is immeasurably important. He's worth whatever it's going to take to pay him, because he just missed the second and third games of his career. He's in season 6. This dude is out there playing like fucking Ray Lewis at the wide receiver position. And people want to point to the penalties. Yeah, he has too many of them. I don't give a fuck. Take him off the top. Take his penalty yards off the top of his receiving yards. Do that with every other receiver in the NFL.
Take it off the PIs he draws. Just take it off
where
the PI.
No one wants to talk about that. No one wants to talk about Tyler Lockett still being able to see single coverage at this point in his career as productive as he has been. Like, I don't know, man. I just reject this premise out of hand. I'm sorry for hogging the mic. I'll let y'all fill in whatever gaps you see.
No, that's good on you, Jackson. Here, there we go. Let me just say this. I had the opportunity to meet John Clayton once and talk ball with him for like 4 hours. It was phenomenal. And the late, great John Clayton. And he used to always say, one of his ongoing mantras when he was on any platform that he appeared on was the NFL is a talent acquisition league, right? And what are we talking about here? At the end of the day, it's to win championships, you need good players. And when you have good players, for God's sake, keep them. And he's not just a good player, he's a unique player. You cannot find another DK Metcalf in this coming draft. What he does is unique. Is he flawed in some areas? Is he limited? So sure, but he is unique in what he does. You have that. He wants to be here. You absolutely keep him. And also, do any of us think in this room right now that Tyler Lockett's going to be on this roster next year? I don't. And so you're only paying one guy top of the market money, and you're doing it for the right reason. I reject, same as you. I reject the premise. And you say, if you get a first round pick, as good as DK is, I don't know that that's the market anymore for big time wide. AJ Brown might be the last.
How'd that work out for Tennessee?
Right. Exactly.
They're still looking.
Oh, they just drafted. Oh, it's okay. We'll just draft the next AJ Brown. Let's get.
Don't forget they just spent they spent the same amount of money for AJ Brown on Calvin Ridley.
So I'm going to throw this up there, guys.
Hey, I got to chime in on the DK thing real quick, because you know that I'm the biggest DK guy in here, and I literally talk about the guy every week on the show, like literally, because I like that the things that you guys brought up that go unnoticed that people sometimes don't realize. They want to, he didn't go up and high point this ball. But you talk about the blocking, you talk about how teams are scheming him defensively. Tyler Lockett left wide open. And the other thing I gotta add, this dude brings the fight on every single down. He brings the fight in. He's got the dog mentality. And we were screaming for years for a big athletic wide receiver. And then all of a sudden we get one, and it's like he can't win. He was out the first game. The offense is doesn't do anything. 3 points. We get a late one there. So it's like, oh man, well, everyone's kind of quiet. And then JSN goes off, and it's like, hey, we can go without DK. It's like it's crazy to me. And I just think with all that stuff, you talk about the first rounder. Look at teams that are always trying to find that guy. The Chiefs I get they won a Super Bowl, but that offense, they got a good defense now. But Tyreek Hill leaves the building. They didn't just magically replace Tyreek. It's not. It does.
Sure,
it's
you have
not,
Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and Steve Spagnuolo.
Sure, you're going to be fine. Okay, but as far as the receiver is concerned, but just every intangible this guy brings. You talk about, people rave about the Legion of Boom and how we went on our Super Bowl runs. I mean, a lot of that came down to mentality of those players you had on that field too. And DK has it. You could have slid DK in on that roster. We talk about the other side of the ball. That's why we love the Devin Witherspoon. A lot of it's like you need that fight. Like it's football. So I'm in agreement. I just sign this guy for whatever you want. Yeah. I mean, give this guy and to talk about cornerstones, that's the guy you can figure out the offensive line. That could be two separate conversations. That's as far as I'm concerned. You can figure out how to fix this O-line, but you're still keeping DK Metcalf.
So let me go through this, guys. Oh, sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
Real quick with this too, by the way, blew me away is that you look through 5 years of DK and Calvin Johnson through their first 5 years, and their stats are stunningly similar. What do you guys think the percentage base was of because this to the prior point of Corey, he's not alone on this. There's a percentage in the Hawk fan base that has this mentality. What do you think the Detroit fan base was percentage-wise in the percentage that we're looking to move Calvin Johnson after 5 years with the stats he put up there in Detroit? No. Same stats all across the board. Go 1%, 0.05?
With a way higher target volume.
Right. Well, with Stat Padford at the time, right? The captain playing from behind, throwing the ball 24/7, which in most of DK's games you've been in. You're not getting boat raced in, so you're competitively. And Jackson talked about the fact, I think 5 of his first 6 years, he's been the number 2 targeted guy on your team. Tigler's been the number 1 most targeted guy of 5 of the 6 seasons that DK has been here. So that's the part that I just it kind of throws me off a bit with the fan base at times that there's a pull to do this when this guy's having such a great start, and that you just, in any other place, they'd be revering him and celebrating him and holding him on high. And I know he's not perfect, but goodness, he's one of the things helping us here.
I think the biggest thing is more it's that rubs certain people, and like you said, the penalties. I don't care about that, and that's the thing. They're so focused on that, like, oh, he's taking a 15-yarder and now he's getting into it here. It's like, well, that's what I love about the guy.
You know who was the most penalized player in the NFL during his career? Michael Bennett.
Well, I was just gonna say, how many penalties did the Legion of Boom get? I think we led the league. But there, when you talk about Doug Baldwin's mentality, that's what I can't grasp. Is like,
he's Doug Baldwin. If Doug Baldwin was 6'4", 230 and ran,
well, that's what I'm saying. But again, a guy who's got dog in him, that brings the fight, who has a chip on his shoulder, and to me, with DK's physique, he still plays like that. And that's what you love. You love that mentality. You kind of you want to see that more from like a JSN. You sort of saw a little more like, okay, let's go. I mean, I want to see that. And I think when you do see that, penalties kind of come with it sometimes. And to me, I think it's so minor but people, put that at the forefront with this guy. And it's just too bad. Because like you said, he's just everything about this team, talking about finding identity, right? You need that. To me, I think we're all in agreement. I think he'll be around for a while. I think they're going to get that taken care of, and he'll be a Seahawk for years to come here.
I'm sorry. I'm going to say.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, Brandon, please.
You know what solves this argument real quick if you guys get in this debate? It's the quickest thing that I found to just solve this. Is that somebody goes, he's not a top 10 wide receiver. You don't want to pay him top 10. So I go, okay, why is then the last 5 years, every single year, he's top 10 in the double team rates in the NFL? That's a trackable stat. And he's been as high as number 2, just behind Devontae Adams in one of those years. Are the NFL, does that mean defensive coordinators are wrong and you as the fan is right?
This is what this comes down to me. Like, why are you a fan? If your team doesn't win the Super Bowl, the season's a failure. What a miserable fucking way to go through life. Why even turn on the TV 90% of the seasons?
Well,
but in the meantime, if you're going to have a cool as fuck player doing cool as fuck shit every week and also putting up huge stats, is that not cool? If you've got a team that's in the middle of the pack, does that not make it more fun?
Well, look at that Atlanta halftime, going into the half. Who else is doing that, right? Going into the half, they drop that post route. There's DK, right? I mean, come on.
They're 100% kicking that field goal if DK Metcalf isn't on the field.
Yeah. And I would wager that most of the people that are in the trade DK camp are also those people that are criticizing John Schneider for being bad at drafting and being a bad GM. It's one of the most successful draft picks on his resume, right? Dude 100%. Fell in the draft. We look from afar at these other teams every year whose GMs do this. I think of, the Ravens are really good at this. The Pittsburgh Steelers, just letting the draft come to them and just snapping up other teams' mistakes, right? And we did that. He even saw it happening, moved up to get him in the last pick of the second round, I think it was. Like, it's one of his best draft picks ever, and we want to move on from this guy. He personifies everything that I want in the way I want my football team to play football. And also, if you take the roster as a whole and you rank players that if they moved on to other teams and were successful, that would hurt you the most, seeing DK go somewhere else and kick ass would be the most painful thing.
How painful would it really be, though, if he went and did what Sherman did to us and went down and put on the gold and the red? I'm just saying, though, that is something like you don't. The thing that drives me nuts about the DK conversation is, what more does he have to do? Is it because he's not number 1 in receiving yards? Is it because we're not necessarily in the Super Bowl conversation? This is why you want to get rid of this player. As an offensive coordinator myself, when you have a guy that is a guy, he changes how you call the game. He changes how your other players respond. Like, if JSN keeps on this trajectory of what he did, and you now add DK back into that, do you not think JSN is going to have more room to operate because teams are going to go, okay, DK's back on the field. Immediately, we're going to bracket our safety. Like Brandon said, we're going to go over top of DK. Now JSN's working more with open space. It's just an asinine conversation to me about a player that
went away this last week, Bryce. The last 2 weeks, cover shell is gone. Bills, Rams, go watch the All-22. It's single high all day long.
Yep.
And now DK comes back next week. Where we gonna see again now?
All right.
Back
And
to
you
the
know what?
Cover 2 show.
One of the other big arguments for trade DK is how much money he's making. And when he signed his extension a couple years ago, and all of a sudden he's a top 5 paid wide receiver, I was just hammering. First of all, he's worth that money. Full stop. Secondly, how valuable is that contract going to be in year 3 and year 4 when everybody else is signing their extension? So I'm going to read to you the 6 receivers that are making more money than him, like immediately above him. DK is 13th right now in the NFL.
Yep.
All right. The 6 that are making more than him and the 6 that are making less than him, but that are all right in this range. I'm not saying you got to answer this out loud. Just for those of you listening, mentally, how many of these players would you rather be giving this type of money to? Brandon Ayuk, Jalen Waddle, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Amari Cooper, Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, Nico Collins, Devontae Smith, Calvin Ridley, Michael Pittman, Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
It's
like there's like 3.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Debatable. Yeah.
I'm looking at the exact same list. I pulled up the positional group on Over the Cap, and I'm telling you right now, like Justin Jefferson set the market, right? He's 25 years old, $140 million in total value, 35 average annual value. If DK Metcalf hit the market as an unrestricted free agent this offseason, he's getting $35 million a year average annual value from someone. I truly believe that.
Okay, guys. So we're going to move. And so I'm just going to put Mookie. So Mookie Alexander from Field Goals chimed in here, and he's kind of caught a stir a little bit. So first off, Mookie put in this kind of a sarcastic answer to what we're talking about. He goes, yeah, I'd love to have JSN receiver 1, then let Jake Bobo and Cody White be our other receivers on the squad. And he goes, every offensive snap would look like when a basketball team has 1 shooter and 4 guys who can't hit from outside the paint. Pretty much, if you got rid of DK, that is what it would look like. Mookie's also got this question in for us, a legitimate one here. What changes should the Seahawks consider making along the O-line this season? I think there's a good case to sit Connor Williams, knowing he still can't snap from shotgun properly after 4 years. That's a honest kind of question, guys. Does Jalen, do we move Connor Williams to a guard spot and bring in Jalen Sundell at center?
That's something,
is that a conversational piece if it gets any worse after the bye here?
I've seen that suggested, but Connor Williams wasn't as good as a guard as he was at center. He played guard in Dallas. They were willing to let him walk. He goes to Miami. They make him a center, and he plays at a Pro Bowl, almost an all-pro level. Now I think we can all agree he doesn't seem to be back to that level yet. But that is something that's been suggested. Like if guard is that bad, he was passable as a guard in Dallas. Do you move him over and give one of these other centers a shot? The question then becomes, which guy do they like better? Because as much as I thought, I was bullish on Olu Oluwatimi as a solid long-term starter, didn't think he might ever, ascend to a Pro Bowl level. They seem to have Jalen Sundell above him on the depth chart. And as much as he popped to me in the preseason and especially when we were at CenturyLink Field or Lumen Field, you and I, Bryce, and we were watching that, where he looked good. But it's so hard to tell, right? You don't know until he gets in there. But he's the guy they brought in the heavy package last week over Olu. And he seems to be ahead for them on the depth chart. So I'm not sure who that guy would be. But it's an option. I think if we're going to find anything out, we're going to find it out pretty quickly, right? You come out of the bye. Mike McDonald talked going into the bye about self-scouting and assessing ourselves and looking in the mirror and the whole sunk cost thing. Are we going to see some lineup changes? Like, could it be a personnel change? I don't know, because he also says we have the right guys. I think it would take things kind of going off the rails and maybe losing a couple consecutively out of the break for any bigger moves like that. But yeah, it's a valid question.
I think Connor Williams has gotten little by little better throughout the year, which you'd expect for a guy coming off for torn ACL, who didn't have a training camp. And the snap issues are concerning, but he's giving you somewhere between like 15 and the 22nd best center play in the league. Whereas the last couple of years between Austin Blythe and Evan Brown, we've been around 32, 33. And so like we've had like backup level of play in recent years. So he's giving you a little bit of improvement there. And this goes at the same time as Laken Tomlinson has also slowly by bit gotten a little bit better over the course of the year. I'm not saying he's impactful. I'm not saying he's just getting to almost kind of a league average state. So I don't know where Sundell stands as far as their evaluation. I don't even know really to think. I don't have a lot of look at him, but I think they're just going to probably ride with what they got. I'd be very surprised to see him move off at this point.
Jacson,
and they may still very well. They might still very well want to extend him too. That was the narrative when they signed him was 1 year deal, make sure he's healthy, whatever. But both sides agree that this might be a longer term relationship, and they might still be in that boat.
Got to deal with something.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So we'll get through a couple more comments here, and then we'll get back into some of the outline questions we've got. So Everything NFL podcast, just a comment from him. Feels like Clash of the Titans, best Seahawkers in the business. Thank you, Everything NFL podcast, for that. Sean Thompson, how would you guys feel about this team if the Seahawks would have won the Rams game? Any difference?
They're the same team, win or lose.
I don't think there's a difference.
Them losing that game fucking sucks. Here's the deal. 60% of NFL games can be decided on a play or three. And Seattle was the better team against the Rams, and they lost. And you know what? Sometimes it fucking happens. Seattle, I mean, Jesus, look at the Russell Wilson era. How many times did the Seahawks win when they were the worst team on the field? Yeah. Because they had someone making a play. They held Kyron Williams, the second most unstoppable running back in the NFL this year. First game without a touchdown in almost a full season. Held him to 2.8 yards per carry, damn near half of what he had been averaging. Held Matt Stafford with his receiving core to 6.8 yards per drop back. That's without recording even a sack. Like, they won that game. Geno threw for 360, and half of those yards JSN had without the help of DK Metcalf. And he had another 70 yards brought back on penalties that had nothing to do with either Geno or JSN. Like, they were the better team in this game. And sometimes you lose when you're the better team. My perspective of the Seahawks, my outlook on their trajectory didn't change whether they had scored in overtime and won this game or whether they had lost. Now, obviously, their prospects for making the playoffs got affected in a huge way by losing. But if we are going to have the bravery to step away from outcome and look at process, there's no difference to me in my outlook on this team with them winning and losing that game.
Same. I think Jacson used the word earlier, diagnostic for the season. I think that once we got through some of those real embarrassing losses through the course, no matter where your high hopes were, you had to be more in a position of, okay, this is more about now the full term assessment of this team throughout this year, which is then not a game by game situation. And they played well. I thought we were the better team. That's also a valid point, but that's where I've kind of found myself. I'm hopeful still for this year, but that does lean me more into that role. And that's more about a full season of assessment than it is a game to game thing.
Yeah.
All right, so here's another one from Hawk fan Matt. As we wrap up this part of the Q&A, are you bothered at all by the lack of communication from ownership? I don't want Jerry Jones level meddling, but given the state of things, it would be nice to know what they think. Well, given Jody's track record, she doesn't really make a lot of public statements. It's usually kind of closed door, her talking to John, or at the time, John and Pete. We don't generally hear a lot from Jody. Are you guys kind of surprised at this point?
Point to a successful franchise where the owner is out front and center and vocal and part of the weekly narrative. I don't think it's healthy. I'd much rather they just put good people in place and let them do their job.
Amen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if as long as there's if she's on it, right? If you see, you're going to see it with the moves, right? You're going to see it with the moves. I mean, if there's communication with John and all that kind of stuff, but yeah, she doesn't need to be in the limelight. She really isn't. I mean, I don't think I wouldn't recognize her if she walked past me. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a bad thing at all. Cause I don't know if there's a middle ground. You guys agree? Like, I feel like, is there that middle ground owner where they kind of make, I feel like if you can start making appearances, you get into that Jerry Jones, Mark Cuban, go down the list. That's NBA for everybody, but or the Steve Ballmers, whatever. Like I feel like it's one or the other. So man,
Well,
as long as an owner's committed to winning and putting a good product on the field, because there's other types of owners that you don't hear much from, and they just want to make as much money as possible and put a subpar product on the field. So I lean towards, as long as there's that right commitment from ownership, I don't care if she makes a public.
I 1000% do not want Jody Allen meddling, because
oh God,
her brother specifically stated that he did not want her in control of the team in the event of his passing. Like, she is fighting against the trust to retain ownership of this team. There is a very good possibility that she's not the owner of this team a couple of years.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
And just wanted to add to that, Mookie, here before we go back to some of our topics. I think it should be noted that Paul Allen was not a super hands-on owner of the Seahawks, outside having to quickly pull the plug on Mora.
You want your owner to do two things. You want him to come in and make the major decisions at key moments, like, and I don't know if it was her or the committee last year, she did with Carroll. It was time to move on from Carroll. I want you to come in at the right moment. In fact, maybe a little bit too. You came in, you made that major decision, and then also spend the money. The team is top 10 for money spent in this sport. That bottom line money spent, not salary cap contracts you've given out, but actual money you've spent in the last 3 years. They're top 10 in the sport with a team that's not really competitive necessarily as far as getting the playoffs and making noise. That shows that there's the level of commitment I want to see on those base 2 points.
And I'm so sorry to jump back in again, but if we want to talk about the role of ownership in the NFL, here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand, and that I wasn't aware of until a few years ago. When you guarantee money in a contract, the owner has to cut a check for that amount and put it into escrow. When you look at the Rams and how they've approached things, and fuck them picks with Les Snead and all of that, and it's worked out, that only works if you have an owner in Stan Kroenke who is willing to cut the checks for massive guaranteed money. It is no longer in his account, right? That guaranteed money is guaranteed. It is out of the checking account of the owner. And so when Brandon talks about Jody Allen's willingness to spend and Paul Allen's willingness to spend, that means they are cutting real checks. You want your owners to be rich as fuck. And the Allen family is rich as fuck. That's what you want in an ownership.
And the next owner is probably going to be rich as fuck too. Because
yeah. I think
I got a feeling the next owner is going to be someone that's had another quite successful business potentially.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, who doesn't, right? And it's a thing. But going back to your guys' point, it's that's the thing. All these guys are billionaires, whether they want to commit to, like you just mentioned, cutting those checks. Because some guys with a revenue share in every league, I'll just put some in my pocket and we'll put out the bare minimum, right? 100%. And that's exactly what you don't want, because it starts from the top, right? Everyone knows that it starts from the top. If there's not money spent and there's not that commitment, it makes everybody else's job harder. You're just not on an equal playing field by any means. So yeah.
All right, guys. So let's hop back into some of our topics here, and I'll throw this one up just to get us back into it. Players who have impressed and not impressed this season. Jacson, let's start with you.
All right. I'm going to try and go off of like the real top end players, because I think Gino has been great. I think DK has been great. Really, really impressed with Leonard Williams. Really, really impressed with Byron Murphy. Really impressed with Boye Mafia. I think that defensive line is really coming together. We haven't seen this team with Uchenna and Nwosu in a meaningful way. So I think there's a lot of players who are doing well. I think Charles Cross has been good. We had, and I mean, geez, fucking ring the bell for name check, but we had Walter Jones on our show, and he talked about like, yeah, I got a lot of credit for being great, and I was, but it's because I had good offensive linemen around me. If someone else is failing at their job, I can look really bad. I mean, how many times did we see Dwayne Brown slamming his helmet on the sideline when he blocked a guy for 5 seconds, but that guy ends up making the sack, and he gets dinged for that because
three-step drop, Russell. It's a three-step drop.
Exactly. It's either Russ not pulling the trigger on his first and second read and trying to go hero mode, or it's because two other guys on the line missed their blocks and chased Russell Wilson straight into the guy that Dwayne Brown had been erasing all play. Right? Like, I think Charles Cross has been good. Now, I've been super disappointed in the linebackers, super disappointed in every other offensive lineman, and frankly, a little disappointed in Tyler Lockett. I think that, and whatever, he's 30 and 30 years old and weighs 30 pounds. Like I get it, but outside of a couple of games where he had like 70 yards receiving, he's not adding to this offense. So I think that's a disappointment. I was looking for a step forward from Devin Witherspoon, and he's had some real moments. Like, Devin Witherspoon is my next DK Metcalf. Like, he's right on the verge of me just planting my flag in this guy, but I really expected him to take a leap forward with Mike McDonald. Maybe he still will, because I think he's an insanely talented player and maybe the most instinctive defensive player Seattle has had since Bobby Wagner. I think it's all there, but he's had a lot of mistakes this year.
Brandon?
I think that Jackson's list probably pretty good, so I'd probably lean into about where he's at. The one guy that I maybe would mention, or a guy or two I'd mention aside from that, I think Woolen to me is a guy I've been paying very close attention to, not because he isn't a good player. He's a good player. He's a great coverage guy. He can take the ball away with ball skills that's unique for the position. But is he a fit for this defense and what Mike McDonald is going to want from his defensive players long term? And there are teams that on a weekly basis, when Woolen is out there, will attack to the edges. Shanahan's very good about running that outside zone play right at him. And I just see too many times with him on tape where the willingness to get in there and tackle is not showing up. Richard Sherman was a guy that transitioned from receiver to cornerback as well. But you felt by year 3 the tenaciousness and the willingness and the want to get in there and actually want to be a good tackler versus looking for those moments where you can kind of avoid it or just let me make a good theatrical appearance of this. And on the other side of it, a game like last week where he does take the ball away, which was great in that moment. But then you have a later point in this game where my feeling on this is that, look, if you're going to be a guy that I just can't count on to tackle or be very tenacious to get off blocks, then I need you to take the ball away and be a great cover corner man. I need you to be that guy that'll get that 7-8 interceptions. But hey, you just, Deion Sanders didn't tackle well. It's not the worst thing for corners. But then he has that moment in this last game, and I see some of these plays with him on film too, where he's just sort of staring at the ball in the air. He's kind of looking at it, waiting, and the receiver undercuts him and ends up catching the ball, where not only do you not get the interception, they catch it and they lead down to the score, where later on in the game, you've got a boxed up unit there to stop the run. Your butt doesn't play the run anyway. Why are you looking in the backfield just after the snap while he's running a 9 route? Like, use your brain. You're year 3. You're not a rookie anymore. So he's been a guy that to me, I've been really closely watching, because he's one of those guys we have to look at his potential contract extension after this year. He's winning that after year 3. He's technically eligible. He can come to the front office and say, hey, I've outperformed my rookie deal. So he's been a little bit on that side of it for me, just on that other end. But I think the Jackson's other guy were pretty much where I'm at.
Dan?
Yeah, I think, trying to pick a couple other names that haven't been mentioned. I mean, just to echo some of the things the guys have said, like I think Charles Cross has, especially given the struggles of the other 4 guys, I think he has only confirmed that he's worthy of whatever extension he's worth when the time comes, and they need to do that. They need to keep him. It hasn't been something they've done historically with offensive linemen is give them multiple contracts, but he needs to be a guy that they keep. I think just staying on the offensive side of the ball, obviously, we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about Geno. I think he's the only reason that they've even had a chance to be in all these games, in some respect. But I think Kenneth Walker in some ways has only confirmed for me what a quality player he is. You look at this game this last Sunday with 25 carries. I think he's improved himself in the pass game and become a much more formidable weapon there. He already has exceeded his career high for catches in a season. And I think he can a really valuable weapon there. And I think even without having gaping holes to run through, he's running harder. He's more physical. I think he's more decisive than he's been in the past. On the defensive side of the ball, a couple guys that haven't been mentioned. I'll start with the negative, finish with the positive. I echo what's been said about Reek Woolen. I think that's a question. He's given up 5 touchdowns in coverage this year. The play against the Rams that you talk about where he was really passive, thought it was coming right into his gut instead of fighting for the ball, was a potential game changer. If he doesn't fit the style, he might be one of the few guys on the roster that could really really kind of coerce another team to give up some legitimate resources to trade for him, if that's something that you think you want to do. But a couple of guys that have impressed me on defense that I think could be building blocks moving forward. Derek Hall, who's a guy that you root for anyway, just his story and the dude he is and his history and how he exhibits everything that I think Mike McDonald looks for in a player. And he's not the twitchiest, most fastest guy, and that's going to beat you with bend off the edge, but that's not what we saw on tape from Auburn either. He's physical, he's powerful, he can set the edge, and he can get to the quarterback. And when he does, he gets there with a purpose. And I've been really, really impressed with what I've seen out of Kobe Bryant the last couple of weeks. And I think Rayshawn Jenkins is going to have a hard time winning that job back. I don't think it's a given that he steps right back into the starting lineup when he comes back from injury, if he comes off IR but before the end of the year. I think Kobe's been good.
So, Dan, you literally took the only two guys I would have added to either Brandon or Jack list. It's all good, but for me, I have been a huge Kobe Bryant fan since we drafted him. And when we got him, I didn't see him as a corner. I went, yeah, I can see the issues with his hips and not being able to play outside corner, but he's so smart. He knows how to find the ball. So when they moved him to safety last year, I went, I think this may be his home, his spot. And the last couple of games watching him play in safety with Julian Love, and Julian Love's another guy that's had a pretty good season. Yes, he's had some ups and downs, but Julian Love is, I think, for once I look at our safeties and I don't go, we put a crap ton of money there and they're underperforming. I look at our safety group and go, hey, look, we've got some young guys that we have potentially going forward that are going to fit this and fit what we need to do. And I think Kobe Bryant and, Julian Love are going to be two kind of cornerstones on that defense going forward, because I don't see Jenkins or Wallace on the team next year.
It's a $5.4 million cap savings if you move on from Jenkins in year 2.
Reek is interesting because you look at him and Brandon, like you said, he's, you look at the physical nature of him with the speed and the length, but it's one of those things that we'll see, because I think that was one guy on our list. Wait till Mike McDonald gets his hands on, player A, player B. Reek was one of those guys we thought, and obviously still early, but to me, as we go on, it really could just come down to a mentality thing. That's something that you just can't teach, and you might see some streakiness out of him. He makes a great play, but then, like you mentioned, when he's sitting back and waiting for that football, that's instincts, and then you talk about the other side of the ball with Devin Witherspoon, completely different mentalities, right? Like they just come in, one guy's born like this, one guy's like that. And that's just the way it might be with Reek. I think he's a talent, obviously, but like you said, if he's maybe not a tackler, he's got to be really good at that one thing. And if not, then it could be expendable if Mike gets in that room with the guys and thinking, hey, this might not be the fit for my defense. But time will tell with him. But like you said, year 3, you expect a little more stuff. And that's the thing. You bring up Sherman. Talk about a mentality, right? And that whole, obviously, Legion of Boom. And that's what made him so great, too. The Aaron Andrews interview. That's, I'm sure, one of the greatest, right? That's just what he brought. He's just that fire and obviously the talent as well. But so and then I just agree. You guys just threw at everybody. So but Spoon, I agree. Both sides there. I see a little more. That was another guy who like, man, he's gonna just level up now with Mike. But I think he will eventually. I think he's gonna fit in, and just because he's a talent. I just love the guy.
All right, so I'm gonna throw one up here, even though I think I know where everyone is on this side, but I think it's something that we kind of can discuss a little bit to an extent. Because of our line and the money we would have to commit potentially, or investment in there, whether it's trade, whether it's draft pick, capital, whatever, are we better off going in a different direction at QB, i.e. Sam Howell, or someone more mobile due to Geno being a pocket passer and us being incapable of properly protecting him? Now, I'm going to first say, before everyone goes off on this question and lambastes me with it, even in the comments.
What are you talking about?
I do really like Geno. I think Geno's done amazing stuff given what he's been having to work with in an O-line with an offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron. I have my view of Geno and where he fits in the hierarchy of, being a quarterback. I think he's good. I don't think he's great, but I think he's good. And I think he works as this team currently works. But if we're going to put money into an O-line, potentially have to extend DK. Does it make sense to pay a quarterback that's a win now quarterback for a team that potentially isn't in that spot? And given the fact our O-line can't protect a guy that can dice you up from the pocket, that's the kind of question I think it is. It isn't more of Geno's incapable of being the guy. I think it's more of is Geno's skill set suited behind the lackluster O-line that we currently have in place?
Can I start?
Brandon, I'll let you go first because I can see Jackson's kind of potentially fuming over
this question. So, number one, let's unpack this really quickly. Sam Howell's not any time of an answer right now or anytime soon. He had better pass protection with Washington last year, a better run blocking, better run crew up there, and he took 50 sacks and 21 interceptions. You put him in a much worse situation, you will get even worse results. So let's toss that one out. You got 94 pressures allowed, which is leading the league. Pressure stats tracked by under 2.5 seconds. Your quarterback is getting hit when he was blocked initially. That leads the league. No quarterback is going to be successful in that environment. Let's add a couple other stats onto that. You got 3 of the top 25 pass catchers and drops in the NFL on this roster right now. You've got 4 of the top 56 offensive linemen and how they're penalized on this roster right now. And the 5th in Stone Forsythe, who's top 100, who, as we said earlier, has been on IR for 2 weeks. The Seattle Seahawks are averaging 3rd and 9 on average when they're in third down situations this year. Tracked by Stat Elias all the way to 1980. That is the longest down and distance for any NFL team since 1980. The run blocking is not there. Everybody goes, run, you got to run the ball. Well, if you're averaging a yard per carry, it's kind of run the ball. Isn't that going to kind of then affect the quarterback too if he doesn't have a run game, especially if that defense can load up, pin the ears back, and rush the passer all day long? This is a really, really tough discussion point, this Geno one has been in the fan base. But the thing that just keeps coming up again and again is I think the lack of understanding from those folks that, and quite frankly, Bryce, even a bit on the being on the line a little bit, Geno, where he's good but not great. I don't think you can make that assessment when there's this bad of supporting cast around him, supporting parts around him, and has been so for 2.5 years. Bad defense lives on the field last year. No run game, no pass protection, an offensive scheme, which has been rudimentary. Grubbs may be pressed by the fact that he can't run his full system. And we can certainly say with Waldron now and the Bears that he's pretty much looks like kind of a crap-ass offensive coordinator as well, which is what our thinking was when he was here too. Nothing's working in your favor. How do we expect any quarterback to succeed in that environment? And yet, we have a quarterback who's just about led the league in comeback victories the last 2 years, right? And yet we have a quarterback up there throwing for the most passage yardage in the NFL. And yet he is kind of succeeding. That should be, again, it's like DK to me, should be celebrated, should be revered, but instead we've got a fracturing of the fan base where, I mean, I still hear people saying he's trash, is what he is. It's the same things they said 2 years ago, and it drives me up a wall.
I'll say this. I think, first of all, any organization, you're doing yourself a disservice if when you get to the end of the season and you evaluate all your options, everything isn't on the table. So you absolutely have to consider all options, including, like, are we better off moving this salary and using it in other places? But I think if you're looking at this team right now, if you have an educated football mind and you're running an organization, you're looking at it like most of us are and saying, look what this team does well and what they don't do well. And oh my God, can you imagine how good this offense might be with a good offensive line? Like how Geno's doing what he's doing at such a high level without that, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is I think a lot of the fan base gets sucked into this assumption that the rookie quarterback contract advantage is something that's necessary in order to turn that corner. I'm on Over the Cap right now, and you can go to the contract or the calculator for 2025, and in 30 seconds, you can create $45 million in cap space without negatively impacting the roster, in my opinion, and without touching Geno Smith's contract. You don't have to move him. And if you do decide that he's your guy moving forward, as Brandon touched on, and a lot of the commenters are talking about as well, you're probably going to extend him and add a couple of years, and you can drop that cap hit. Right now it's like 38.5. Yeah, you can
save 5 on a new deal. $45 million for Geno saves $5 million on the first year of the cap hit in 2025.
And just in case people are curious, the moves I made, like, again, I said it earlier, I don't think Tyler Lockett's on this roster. I think it happens very similarly to how Doug Baldwin went off into retirement, where the Seahawks release him and then he announces a day or two later that he's going to retire from the sport, and they probably worked something out. Tyler's not going to have to pay back his signing bonus, right? They're going to take care of him. He's not going to be on this roster next year. Draymond Jones, I don't think, is on this roster next year. And then I removed Rayshon Jenkins and George Fant. That's all I did. And you can roll some money over from this year. It's $45 million in cap space. And there's other moves you can make too. So I'm just saying that when you, again, we talked about this earlier with DK, when you have a good player, especially at a premium position, a position that historically has been proven over and over again is the hardest goddamn position to find and keep in the NFL, you keep that guy until you reach a point where you have to make a move. And they're not there. I think it makes way more sense to extend him and keep him and commit to him for the next couple of years, because the cavalry's not coming. There's some interesting things about this draft class. I'm going to talk about it on the show this next week with a couple of cool guests, but there's no sure things. And with some other needs on this roster, you're not looking to draft a guy at the top of the draft anyway.
I'm going to go to Jacson, but Jacson seems to be hiding a smile there because I think everyone has said basically what Jacson feels on this, but I'll go to Jacson.
The only thing I'll add, I'm 100% on board with what Brandon and Dan are saying. There are so many ways to afford Geno Smith that do not have massive detriments to this team moving forward. Here's the part that I feel gets so lost in this conversation about saving money with Geno Smith. Okay, all right, let's look at the track record of first-round quarterbacks going back however many years. I mean, 2021 was supposed to be the year, right? You got Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, not with his team anymore. Justin Fields, not with his team anymore. Trey Lance, not with his team anymore. Mac Jones, not with his team anymore. You can point to a CJ Stroud. Yeah, phenomenal rookie year. Unbelievable. Everything stayed healthy and worked in his favor last year. This year it hasn't. Geno's been better than him. Purely been better than him this year. The idea that, oh, well, Geno can't win a Super Bowl, so find someone else. Well, shit. Joe Burrow hasn't won a Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts hasn't won a Super Bowl. Lamar Jackson hasn't won a Super Bowl. If that's your litmus test, fucking
Josh Allen,
throw $600 million at Patrick Mahomes, because that's the only way you're fucking winning. Like, if you want to move on from Geno Smith and save some money and draft a guy, all right, let's do it. Are you going to win a Super Bowl in that first year or that second year? 100% no way. That ain't happening. 0% chance of that happening. And during that time, you are wasting years of Charles Cross on his rookie contract, Devin Witherspoon on his rookie contract, DK Metcalf on his extension, all down the line, the extension you gave to Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy on his rookie contract, all of these players, Reek Woolen, on and on and on, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Ken Walker, Zach Charbonnet on their rookie contracts. You're punting all of those. And by the time, if you nail the quarterback, if you're that team that is somehow better than the majority at nailing the next quarterback, by the time he's actually good enough to lead you to compete, you have wasted affordable years of so many of your best players.
So this is like, so for me, I agree with everything you guys are saying. The one thing for me with Geno, and Dan, I talked about it a bit on your show when you and me were on, is the only thing that I've become concerned with Geno this year, and it's not physical talent, it's not, leadership, it's not any of those things. And I think it's in part due watching back the O-line and how bad the O-line has really been, is some of the decision making, because he has to win the game, because you can't run the ball, you can't do this, you can't do that. And that's where I feel, for me, the conversation kind of got started a little bit, and I've had the ability to kind of rewind back and look at the Rams game, for example, and his 2 red zone interceptions. And I made statements on Dan's show about how those interceptions occurred. And I coach quarterbacks, and I'm an offensive coordinator. There's things that your quarterback's mentality changes when he doesn't have working parts around him. He feels like he has to press and has to do that little bit extra to make things happen. Yeah. And I think that's what's occurring to Geno this year, is he doesn't have anybody else to rely on, even when DK's out there or JSN or whatever. because that O-line is so fractured and they don't have another component to this offense, because like Brandon said, you can't run the ball. You're running it for 1 yard a carry. You're not going to do anything. He's pressing, and that is leading to the high interception rate, which Patrick Mahomes also has. I just think with this conversation is you don't have a better solution, so there's no point in changing something until that does present itself, which and when it does. So that's where I'll leave that one. I'm going to put up another question. I have to take a
just
quick
really
phone
quick.
call.
Sorry, real quick too, just on this, is that the price is not going to be as high as presented. I saw Puckett put a video out where it's like 20% of the salary cap for Geno Smith. He's averaged 6.5% of the salary cap the last 2 years. He signed a pretty good deal for the Hawks, the last deal. If he puts a similar contract together, the cost is not going to be significantly high, and there will be savings in the first year of that deal.
Yeah. Real quick on when do you think? Because in the short term or whatever, obviously age will be a factor down the road. When do you think they do go get a guy? Because I don't know, it sounded pretty sure that they were even going to possibly take Anthony Richardson the draft before if he fell to them at 5. I don't know if that's what you guys have heard, but we heard from some reputable people that it was looking like that way where you could sit him, right? Like the development thing, the Green Bay thing, where here's a guy, great situation for a guy who's played limited games in even college, has physical tools, can sit behind a Geno Smith, maybe for even 3 seasons like Penix is doing right now, which a lot of people, it could be a great way to develop now. We don't see that as much. When do you think they will sort of go that road? We don't like, this year doesn't look like a great draft, obviously. But if there is that draft where, hey, there's some quarterback talent, at some point, when do you see maybe that next developmental guy coming in the system?
That's a tough one, because you look at, there's generally two ways that teams go about that. You can be really proactive, like the Falcons just were, like the Green Bay Packers have been twice in our lifetimes that we've seen. That can cause some issues, right? And some questions. And yeah, first of all, if the Seahawks had taken Richardson at number 5, which there was a lot of legitimate reporting that he's a guy that was at the top of their board, aren't we all kind of feeling right now like we dodged a bullet there? Like, he was a project, obviously, and he's really, really struggling right now. So maybe we're happy that didn't happen. But you can either be really proactive like the Packers and the Falcons have done, or you can wait until you have no other choice. And I think that is a little bit of where the Seahawks are stuck in the middle right now, in some ways, that they have a really good quarterback. It's performing at a very high level, despite some of the inefficiencies on offense that he has to deal with. And yet, by average annual value, he's only being paid the 20th most in the league, right? So you're getting value there. He's a guy that looks like he has a lot of tread left on the tires. And then you're entering into a very, very uncertain time where you're probably going to finish around the middle of the pack in the first round when it comes to draft pick. It's a quarterback class that has a lot of interesting upside, but there's zero consensus on this class at all.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, a lot of fans, I get this a lot. I'm sure you guys do too. Just do it. Just go with a young quarterback. Just draft a guy. Like, okay, so then you're scrapping the whole thing. You are committing 100% to a full rebuild. Are you willing to live through that? Because it's not going to happen overnight. So I think where they are now, you have, again, I'll go back to what I said about DK. You have a good quarterback, a very good quarterback that I think could be even more successful given some improvements on offense. Why move on from him unless you have an answer when you think that you might be closer to being good than to rebuilding? And that's where I stand on that. I think I guess to answer the question is, we'll know, right? If you keep Geno Smith for longer term, that question will answer itself. Either Geno's going to help get us to that next level, given some other improvements of the roster, or not. And then it'll become obvious. And you can go be as aggressive as you want to be to go get whoever you need to go get.
What I think that's kind of interesting, what I want to see this team do, is this team does remind me in some aspects of the old Green Bay Packer teams. When Holmgren was there, Mike Sherman was there, and that is, you have a guy, yes, they had Brett Favre, and I get Brett Favre's a Hall of Famer, and I understand that principle, but they were kind of a middling team constantly. They were never necessarily a Super Bowl contender, and they were nevertheless completely a dumpster fire. You were kind of in this middle, this circle. And what they kept doing is they draft guys. They draft quarterbacks, not first-round talent, but they would draft guys, and they would see, like, do we develop them? That's how we ended up with Matt Hasselbeck. They developed Hasselbeck. He came here. They had Aaron Brooks. They had Mark Brunell. They had Doug Peterson and Ty Detmer and all these other guys that eventually got traded off and ended up going other places. And then when they found a guy, Aaron Rodgers, that they bought into, and they were at that point, they moved to that. And then they went through the same cycle, and then they got Jordan Love, and they've gone through that. But they developed quarterbacks. They didn't just go, hey, we're going to completely trash this and try and keep swinging for the fences and hopefully we nail a Hall of Famer. They built into it. And even when we ran with our Super Bowl team, we had built the roster. The roster was constructed. It was like, okay, here we go get Matt Flynn, and we're going to take a swing on a third-round rookie that was 5'11" and 200 pounds out of Wisconsin, and we drop him in, and the rookie ended up winning the job, and off we went, and we had a decade of success. Yeah. But we've never continued that kind of philosophy of, hey, let's keep adding a piece to this room and see if it works. Because guess what? If you realize that Geno's great and you develop this quarterback and he shows well in a couple cleanup games or whatever, then you can trade him off and you can get capital back, because there might be another team that's quarterback hungry that's like, hey, we need to go get so-and-so, and we need to go give up the money for it or the draft capital to go get this guy. And so I think you got to keep moving with Geno unless you find another option. And I think the other point is, if this season bottoms out and we, like Jack said earlier, only win 5 games, at a point, do they turn and say, hey, well, let's see what Sam Howell gets and just throw him in there and see? Because I think that'll tell everybody what their kind of thought process is going into 2025. So it'll be an interesting discussion, and we can keep going round and round in circles about it. But I'm going to throw this one up, and we'll get kind of just a quick go before we get some more questions, before I know everyone's probably got other things they want to do because we've been at this for 2 hours. What are the cornerstone players that you need to keep going forward?
Oof.
Let's go let's name 10 guys.
I think cornerstone, we've had the discussion before about blue chip, right? I think we've all talked about that on our show. I think that's different. I think blue chip is a guy that's universally regarded as someone that's near all pro level, like star level. I think foundational cornerstone, I think that's different. I don't think I think Derek Hall, who I mentioned earlier, is a good example of a guy that you want to be in the program long term. You want to extend that guy, and you want to have him around. And so let's see, I'll give him a couple on the defensive side, and then we can kind of go through. I think obviously start at the top, Byron Murphy, right? I think Leonard Williams, even though he's an older player, he's a cornerstone. I think Mafe and Hall, those 4 guys up front. Nwosu, we'll see. Like, he's got to come back healthy. And just a reminder that little salary cap exercise I did earlier didn't even touch his contract, right? A lot of people think we need to move on from him because of the injuries. Don't have to. Can keep him. And I think he would fit really well in this system. And so he could. Witherspoon's obviously one. And then I think the jury's out on Ernest Jones. I like what I've seen, and they certainly think of him that way. I think he certainly can be. All those other guys in the secondary, as much as I might like them, I don't know if any of them have proven to be worthy of calling them a corner yet, unless I'm missing someone. So just taking a peek at the defensive side of the ball to get things rolling. Those are the names I would throw out.
I'd go up. Same thing with those guys. Obviously, DK, Cross, Abraham, Lucas, Walker. I love Walker's talent. I really do. But paying running backs, especially paying running backs with an offensive line in as much disrepair as we've had, I'm on the especially we got to pay him this offseason. That's going to maybe provide some hesitancy for me. It has nothing to do with Walker. It's more about the conditions we're putting him in, because there's been a bit of a rule of thumb proven by this one. So I would probably put that to about there. I love Jackson Smith's talent. I do, but I have some worries here that if you're going to run a spread style system, that means more receivers out to the edges, meaning there's more of an emphasis for receivers to have to run block. It's not a matter of like, well, if you can kind of do it as a secondary skill, it'd be nice. You must be able to do it. And with Jackson Smith on tape on a weekly basis, unfortunately, he just does not hold up as a run blocker. So I'm a little worried with him on that part. I know that goes outside of what the main job is of what he has to do, but I don't know if you can, especially if it's going to restrict your offense and how you can run it at times, if it's going to be that much of a kind of negative. Now, he was better this last week, and Mike's talked about challenging him in that way, but if he's going to be one of those cornerstone guys, that's got to be a part of his game that does step forward if you're going to run the spread style system. If you want to go to more traditional NFL kind of offenses, unless of the fire, air raid stuff, then you can do that. But those would be my guys.
Yeah. The way I view this question is, do I want these guys on the team in 2026? Quarterback, I want Geno there, I think. I mean, he's older, but he doesn't have the mileage of other quarterbacks that are his age. Walker, I think Brandon makes a great point. Like, God, how much do you pay a guy who, if you can't block for him, what can you do? That guy has stolen so many yards in his career that other running backs aren't going to do, and running backs aren't that expensive. I'd like to keep him. DK, obviously, y'all know how I feel about that. Brandon makes a good point with Jackson Smith and Jigba. Where we probably differ is I don't really give a rip. If you're good enough as a receiver, then, blocking is a bonus. Like, obviously, it's great if you can do it. I don't really care. Tyler Lockett hasn't blocked anyone effectively in his entire career. He's been awesome. On up front, it's Cross and a healthy Lucas. If Lucas isn't healthy, he's not on that. Defensively, agree with Dan. All four of those guys up front. Hopefully, Ernest Jones. And then the secondary, it's for sure Witherspoon, and I think Julian Love, and I think Mike McDonald recognized that immediately. That was the first extension made in the Mike McDonald era. It didn't take him any time to realize that he wanted Julian Love to be back end, and then you make sure Michael Dixon is your punter.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, I like the Dixon one.
Number 4.
Yeah, man, it sounds like that's a lot of guys. And I think that goes back to just all the offseason talk about what we feel like the amount of talent that's on this roster currently. Like obviously gaping holes with the linebackers and the offensive line. And so if people are saying, hey, is this a gut it down to the studs and rebuild? I think we're on the side of let's make this offensive line a huge focal point. We get this down because it's hard to evaluate everything else, right? Like you said, like Ken Walker is awesome. What price can you get him for? And then, but does that matter if your O-line still has a ton of issues, right? So I think, seeing how this plays out the rest of the year, I think we know what the line's going to be like. But I think this offseason is going to be more interesting. This was an interesting offseason. We had with Mike McDonald and Pete Carroll. It was a lot to talk about. I think this offseason is going to be maybe even more interesting because now you got Mike involved and want to see now the microscopes with John Schneider, and is he or is he not going to address this offensive line the way we think he should, or to get this team? Because if we don't, we roll Geno back. Do we expect different results? I think we all agree it's going to hinge on that O-line.
He can do it if he wants. Look at the Chiefs did when they had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lost in the Super Bowl, where you got Mahomes running for his life that whole game. You lost Schwartz, you lost Luke Fisher, your right tackles. You had other guys on the inside retiring. What did they do that offseason? Orlando Brown trade. We're going to draft Creed Humphrey. We're going to go pay the money for Joe Thuney. We're even going to go bring in Austin Blythe, who didn't even start for him. They spent $4 million on him, not to start like we would have done, but to be a backup. You can take that approach this offseason if you hammer in that way, and you can get back instantaneous results from that if you do it right.
And you absolutely can, because there isn't, like, we look at, and John Fraley had a tweet earlier this week, and then Seaside Joe picked up on it and wrote a whole column on it about the offseason, this free agent class, right? And it hasn't been good. And that was pretty significant money spent when you look at it across the board, a lot of one-year deals. They don't have to do that this offseason. I know John likes to, because he likes to hedge the draft so they can stick to their board and go best player available. But I think if we go position by position, we all like the groups heading into 2025 for the most part, right? You add a guy here, you add a guy there. That's what the draft is for. He can absolutely be as aggressive as he wants to be in free agency to add veteran talent on the offensive line, not necessarily superstar talent, and change it and improve it in 1 year. And then hopefully, some of these young guys that they have spent draft capital on the last couple of years will step up and be able to play a part as well. But he has no excuses. He absolutely can be as aggressive as he wants to be this offseason to get veterans to improve that offensive line.
Okay, guys. So one thing I'm going to do here, Jackson's actually got to run. So Jackson, thank you for joining us on the round table.
Yeah,
I'm
man.
sure hope you enjoyed yourself.
There it is.
Yeah, brother.
But Jacson, why don't you just tell everyone that's listening here, because we've got about 900 people tuned into the show, what you got coming up on Cigar Thoughts, what's going on, and the changes to Cigar Thoughts going forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and super honored to be a part of this. I feel very privileged to be sharing opinions with you guys. This is a very, very smart panel. As far as Cigar Thoughts goes, I've been writing this column for 13 years, and it's been awesome. It's been therapeutic, and it's been cool to hear that those columns after every game have been therapeutic for a lot of fans. This is my last season doing that as far as writing. And a lot of people ask me, why is that? The main reason is I don't really know what it's like to just be a Seahawks fan, and I kind of just want to watch the games. And I'm looking forward to doing that. The show, however, is going to continue. I'm having a blast doing the Cigar Thoughts podcast. We're going to keep that going. So you can find Cigar Thoughts everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Just type in Cigar Thoughts. It'll be there. On Twitter, you can find me at Jacson Bevens. And if you're unfamiliar, just know that my first name does not have a K in it. It's Jacson. As I always say, no K is okay when you spell my name. So if for some reason you've heard everything I said today and you want more, that's where you get it, but you'll probably regret the decision.
Yeah, man, we appreciate you coming on, guys. Check it out, because it's an awesome show, and always has some big time guests on that show too. So awesome stuff, man. Appreciate it. We got a few more minutes here ourselves, but yeah, we appreciate you coming in. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, fellas. Yeah, appreciate y'all.
All right, later. All right, guys, we got a little more time here. Bryce, you want to maybe jump into?
Yeah, we'll go back into
question or two, and I don't know if you guys got a few more minutes, and we'll just kind of.
Yeah, I'm chill.
Okay, cool.
I was gonna say this is easy for Brandon. This is mincemeat. Brandon's on there for 5 hours.
I'm just getting warmed up.
Yeah, he is warming up. It's just that's the warm up.
All right. So here's
7 hour. You had a 7 hour fairly recently.
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was a post game, right? It was a post game.
It was a loss. A post game loss too. I didn't. I swear to God, I blink and the hours go by. I really don't. It's not like people go, "Hey, you're grinding." You're like, I don't notice it. I'm talking, and all of a sudden, just you look over here, and the counter's gone to 5 hours. You're like, oh,
yeah. I mean, I think if the conversations are going smooth and everybody, the time does go. I mean, right now we've been sitting at 2, and it's like, okay,
flies,
it does fly. Yeah. So if you're getting some good interactions, especially doing the Q&A live stuff too, you're trying to get through some stuff. But yeah, Bryce, why don't you?
All right, so I'll throw up this last question, guys, before we get back into our viewer Q&As, because we've got a lot of comments that have flown in this show. So is this team in a rebuild, or sorry, I should say, is this team closer to a rebuild, or are we a few pieces away from being in the playoffs in 2025? And I know we've kind of talked about it the whole show, different things, but overall, when we look at this team, is it solely the offensive line keeping us away from the playoffs, or is there more components to it?
Well, that's my instinct is, Go ahead, Dan. You go first.
No, I was going to say yes. Yes. I think it would be criminal if you came in right now. And thank goodness that the ownership group showed a modicum of patience, right? Because the temptation, a lot of times we see it a lot around the NFL, is to just clean entire house. And they chose not to do that. They chose to keep a lot of things in place and let John Schneider, give him an opportunity to kind of take this thing to the next level. And I'm glad they did that, because rebuilds can be, for sickos like us that love the draft and all the process behind the scenes, we, part of it that we kind of love that, right? Like, as much as I hated watching the Mariners tear it down to the studs, I also kind of got into it too. I don't want to see that happen, because I don't think this team needs that. I think that would have been criminal. And so I absolutely feel like if not to overemphasize it, because there's always opportunities to improve other position groups and get good players, and you want to stick to your board as much as possible in the draft. But my goodness, I think if you go out and make this a competent offensive line in the offseason, league average, I think this team has a chance to contend with the young core they have on hand. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's where I find myself landing as well. Obviously, you could just lose out the rest of the half a season worth of games, and we might have a little bit of a different perspective in the way that the season plays out still. But if it holds to type and if it's to form, I think that that's really the trek to take here, where it does hinge a little bit on decisions like Geno, where you're signing Geno, you're signing because you do think you can contend quickly. But I just keep coming back to that part when I watch the offensive line on tape, and I keep just how bad it is, how it's people will try to sell it as well. That's kind of bad. It's like league worst. It's right in that area of things. Yeah. And it's just the penalties on top of it too, where they're not just bad now, but they're also a penalty machine on top of it. And you go, boy, how is anything going to be functional in that kind of state? And so I keep coming back, fix it hard. And you'll see this team, readily improve, especially the second year of McDonald with this defense, having his guys in now, having them learn. It's an intricate defense. It's a complicated defense. So to give them a second year on that, I feel like that's the route to go.
Yeah, I'm on the mind of if they can do what, like, kind of similar. I don't know if they'll ever be able to do it the same way, but do what Kansas City did after they lost that Super Bowl. And I mentioned it on Dan's show. Like, we're going to go and invest and protect our asset that we currently have. And to be honest, on this offense, there's three main assets. There is DK Metcalf, there is Ken Walker, and there's Geno Smith. If we can make those three things, and you can add JS into that conversation, but I don't think he's there yet. Yes, he had a big game, but I need to see some consistency with that. If you can get those three assets, the best thing for them, which is an offensive line, it allows Geno to function better and get the ball to DK, and it allows K9 to run better. You might see this team change in its totality of what it really is. And with the type of, you look at John Harbaugh teams or Jim Harbaugh teams, Michigan, Baltimore, they have been foundationally good at running the football. And I get Lamar Jackson's a bit of a cheat code, but they build their offense to what they want to set as a tone. Chargers have Justin Herbert. They had Keenan Allen. They have, okay, we're shipping out Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler. We're going to bring in some running backs that are cheaper. We're going to invest in our offensive line. And that's how they play football. And you can see the success. It's written in national championships and Super Bowl wins and all that kind of stuff. It's something the 49ers were trying to get back after they lost Jim Harbaugh and they let him go, was that sense of attitude because they became a doormat because of it. So I think that's what Mike McDonald wants. And I think having a full off season and, going to John and saying, hey, look, we don't have this. I need this. Give me this. Might be a little bit more of a positive boost in putting this a few pieces away from a playoff. Now, we're not saying Super Bowl, so everyone listens. We're saying playoff potential team than a rebuild. Ryan, where are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I echo everybody, man. Like, it's like, I think, we were a playoff team 2 seasons ago. It was almost a playoff team last season. So I think that's the talent of this team. I think, I think we've talked about it. There is a lot of talent. But yeah, it goes back to the thing we just keep talking about, right? So it's this O-line. I think this team could be a very different looking team. And you talk about the quarterback. Sometimes people want to throw it like, Geno and Goff's game, and, Goff doing very well over there. And because he has one of the better offensive lines in the league. And like Dan says, we're not even looking for that. Let's just be middle of the pack. And even at middle of the pack, we can be a completely just a team that you want to see that offense just feel like it's a little more comfortable. You know what I mean? You have the pieces. I think at this point, it feels like every snap you're waiting for something bad to happen or some guy killing Geno or just, it doesn't feel like we have any kind of continuity there and just a flow to the offense because of it. And I think I just want to see, I'd be very surprised if this just isn't a point of emphasis in the offseason. It would be shocking. Like, how do you roll it? How do you run it back? Right. John knows that. How do you run it back and at least make a move or a couple of moves? And I think the biggest thing is, you got to go get whoever that is, go get some veteran talent in that guard spot. And then if it doesn't work out, at least say, hey, I addressed it. Maybe I missed, but I addressed it. And I think that's where we're going to look at it.
Don't you think, Bryce, too, you mentioned some trepidation about Geno's decision-making this year, and as an offensive guy, an offensive coach on this, let's see if you hold any sway to this, being that there's a cumulative effect that starts to take a toll on quarterbacks. And if you're going to put them in an environment like that, where it's always chaos, can you then be surprised 2 years down the line when they're playing somewhat at times chaotically?
No, and that's my whole thing is with Geno's, there's certain things where, and that's where for me, when I went back, rewatched it, looked at the tape, looked at a lot of the interceptions he's had or questionable throws, the two in the red zone in the Rams game were the most damning ones to me. More so the first one where it was in the end zone and it went for the pick six than the Barner thing, because there were other factors in that pick. The thing for me with that one, though, was that when I first watched it, I went, you can't do that. You're a quarterback of 10 plus years. You're in a lose-lose situation. Eat the ball or throw it out of bounds. Watching it back and watching it again, it's a quarterback, and I think the mentality is, I don't know if we're going to get back down here again in the red zone. I need to make something happen. And I'm going to take this risk and take this shot and throw it there and hope it works out. And we saw that with Russell too at points, right? We saw with Russell do that in multiple games where he'd, against the Rams, there were times he did it that 2020 season where it was like that game where they went to LA and all of a sudden it all unraveled after that game in the Buffalo game.
Mm-hmm.
It does start to play a factor. And I think the biggest thing, and this is where I look at Jared Goff. I look at Jared Goff and Geno Smith in a very similar light. Similar skill sets, those type of things. And the thing for me with Jared Goff and what Ben Johnson's done is they built a very solid O-line there in Detroit. But the way Ben Johnson mixes his play calls and they put the quarterback under center and they do the bootlegs. Like you look at Stafford. Stafford didn't beat us on that last throw from being in the pocket. He beat us off a bootleg and setting up and getting outside the pocket because there's a threat of, hey, we can run the ball somewhat efficiently. The fact we have a non-existent run game, and as a coach, I deal with that myself with my offense. We currently have a non-existent run game, and it's causing problems. And you have to find a way to make your run game work. And that's where, for me, like, unless, Charles Cross is the only lineman, in my opinion, that's safe from being potentially bench swapped out or whatever. And I get Connor Williams is a center, and he's had some good. I'm at this point of Connor Williams going, yes, he is playing better, but I haven't seen enough from Connor Williams to say you're safe. You're safe for me from making a move, because you got to find something that works at this point. We're halfway through the season, and what you've currently been throwing out there hasn't worked and hasn't worked well. And you've got to try something new. Like, we're not a Super Bowl team. We're not going to jeopardize everything. So I just look at it and I go, I think Geno is kind of not seeing ghosts, but I think Geno is pressing because of the lack of functionality around him outside of the few times he gets a clean pocket and can operate normally and do that. I think he's pressing, and you're seeing that in some of the decisions. I hope that answers kind of what you were looking for, Brandon.
No, it did.
Yeah, no, for sure. What do you take one or two more here, or we got one up here right here? I know Dan, you kind of responded there in the chat, but yeah, I mean, talk about barely make the playoffs, going 8-9 every year, second draft. Yeah, like you said, that's not going to change how you can build the O-line. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of Bryce and I talked about. If you look at this team in the whole, I think if they, as a Hawks fan, you want them to win every game. But say they win, I don't know, one more game in the year, just for say, and they finish up with 5 wins, maybe 6, for example. Does that put a little more, say, pressure on Schneider where you can't hide behind, hey, well, we were 9-8. It's maybe I'll just fill a little hole here, fill a little hole there, say with the O-line, and maybe then that'll get us to 10. And then maybe we'll make the playoffs. But if you win 5 or 6, and it is not really where you're drafting, but just that's harder to hide behind, and on top of this whole line is now magnified even more that Pete's gone and you're the guy, and it's been a disaster. Is that sort of maybe a way to look at it where, hey, it's not a bad thing where you have a little bit of pain because now, hey, well, I got to wake up and really address things because maybe a little more pressure will be on me when you just look at a win total like that. You
go with this, Dan. Start with this one.
Yeah, I just I think so much can be made, and too much can be made out of looking ahead this early in the season to the draft next year, right? And we're seeing a lot of it in the comments, and I did respond to this one. The draft purgatory thing. We even had Misfit 74 chimed in with, like, I'd rather have a terrible season than be stuck in the middle. I disagree with that, because I think that if you're drafting in the top 5, there's probably much bigger problems on your roster than just one position group. And if we're just focused on that one position group, then being in the middle doesn't matter as much. If you're talking about interior offensive line tackles, different story, right? If there's only 2 top tackles in this draft, which it kind of at this point appears that there are, and things can change between now and April, certainly, then yeah, you might have to be in the top 10 to get one of those 2 guys. But interior offensive line, not the case. You look at last year and you look at Connor Barton and Zach Frazier and some of those guys, Jackson Powers Johnson, some of those guys that lasted later in the draft, right? That maybe we would have liked to have had. Those guys can always be had in the middle to late first round, if not the second round. So I'm not as concerned about that. It's the issue with me is, are we, and this might go back to Brandon's idea, that find a team that might be willing to trade somebody that might have a surplus, right? That might have another massive weakness at another position, and they're trying to balance.
Would you overpay, Dan? If it required to get the quality of a guy for like a Dwayne Brown equivalency, would you overpay on that for a lineman?
This year, with where they are, 100%. Like if Trey Smith actually had interest, because he's the guy. Like I'm looking at it again right now, and whenever I look at the available free agents coming up in the next offseason on Over the Cap, I always filter it by snap counts, right? I want a guy that plays every snap. And the scary thing is, if you look at both guard and center, there's only 3 or 4 guys that have played 100% of the snaps. And 2 of those guys are Connor Williams and Laken Tomlinson. Like there aren't a lot of them out there. But if Trey Smith is that one guy, just to use him as an example, then absolutely, if it takes a Robert Hunt contract to get him, and he's actually interested in coming here and being part of what we want to do, and you have to offer another $5 to $10 million in guaranteed money to get him, this is the year to do it, because I think this roster is built around a veteran quarterback, and it's that close to being good enough with where this division appears to be right now, that this is one of those instances where I 100% would overpay.
Teams get stuck in between for a variety of reasons. It is the worst place to end up as a football team, I would say, because when you're stuck there, you can be stuck there for decades. Cowboys, the Saints on their yearly basis. The thing that I say about this as well, though, is that it's because you always refuse to ever get to a rebuild point. Every year is about, we can go for it this year. We're contenders this year. This year's our year. Let's go for it. Yeah. I don't think over the last couple of years, this team is, I can sell tickets. Sell tickets is another one. Yeah. For just get good enough just to sell all your tickets. At least you're getting your sellouts. This is where you can track us back to 2 years ago, where we made the hard decision. Moving Russell Wilson in retrospect looked great, but it was touchy at the moment, right? You guys, and you got the draft capital back. You ate $50 million in dead money this past offseason. Did we post June 1st Jamal Adams, or did we eat all of that dead money at once? All the Quandre Diggs dead money at once. You're getting the bad money off the books, and while you don't necessarily have any cap space on the surface of it for 225, as Dan had talked about earlier in this stream, there's tons of cap flexibility to create anywhere upwards of $75 to $80 million in cap space this offseason, not to mention your top 3 for cap space in 2026 and 2027. So you've got plenty of room to go out there and buy and stuff. You set yourself up. You set the stage more than you've caught yourself in between, I'd argue. And that's why you don't need to go back necessarily into rebuild here, because you're actually, your fundamentals are nice. Your fundamentals are good. It's not that everything's broken intricately, what the word I want to use, intrinsically. It's that you just got to get your things fixed that are the glaring gaping holes.
Yeah. And when I mentioned, like, I was looking at the comments real quick there. By no means am I advocating for tanking, like, because I agree, I'm not a tanking guy. But it just might happen that we just win 6 games. Like, it's just the way it might happen. You look at the schedule, it's not easy. And if we talk about how bad this one position group is, it can hinder us even winning. It's just been the focal point so much that we might just be forced where, hey, we won 5 or 6, and now it just forces us to not. That doesn't mean we rebuild it, but hey, we can't be 5 wins next season, because that's not middling. That doesn't sell tickets. And that's the big thing, because I agree. You can be 9-8. You got DK Metcalf. You're selling tickets. The fans are, hey, we're right there. But when you hit, because win totals can be deceiving, because I think last season that 9-win team wasn't a great football team. but the record looked a little better. And so if you have a 5 or 6, that's not tanking. That's just what you did. You tried to compete, you tried to win. Now we really have to address this group, and you can, but I just feel there's no hiding, if that makes sense, where it's like, hey, no, we can't do this, because if we do the same thing, it's not a middling thing. Because I hate the middling thing too, but it'll be interesting to see. I think we're gonna have some more answers coming out of the bye week. I don't know what you guys think, but even though we're playing they're not the Niners to the last few years, but they're getting healthy and we're on the road. I want to see how we kind of respond, and that might sort of give us an idea how the rest of the season could play out.
I worry that it's going to have, with the combination, I worry to get to that record you talk about, there's two things that I think caused it to happen. Yeah, the offensive line at the forefront. The other thing we haven't talked about during this stream, though, is the fact that we don't really have a nose tackle on this team.
True.
And the ability to stop the run. And what are we facing of a litany of down the road of the schedule this year, from your Niners to your Rams to your Cardinals teams that run the ball and run the ball very well. And one of the things that's depressing Byron Murphy's rookie year is the fact that you're rocking him in nose tackle 24/7 when he really is a 3-tech.
That's not him. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the trouble because I've already started like doing mock drafts and playing with some of that. And I'm going to talk some draft on the show this next week. And it's hard. Everybody says O-line, no matter what, right? It's kind of like the old Draft Day movie, like with Kevin Costner and or Sonny, what's his name? And he has the Post-it note. It's like, that's what fans want us to do, right? O-line, no matter what. Well, when I do mock drafts, we're sitting at 14 right now in the first round. You're not getting Kelvin Banks or Will Campbell. Those are the two premium tackles. They're gone by then. Yeah. And it's too early to take a guard or a center in most cases, right? The strength of this draft in the middle of that first is interior defensive line. Like there's 3 or 4 dudes that are massive, make a difference. 2 of them are Michigan Wolverines, so there's certainly some familiarity there. And then Deontay Walker's the other dude from Kentucky, but there's others. He
jumped all over Mason Graham. There's no way McDonald's passing on Mason Graham if he's there.
Right. If one of those guys is there, I'm saying this only to prepare people, right? Because I hear it already 6 months out. Like, what? We took another defensive lineman. We have a good defensive line. We needed to take an offensive lineman. It's not how the draft works. And that's also a huge need. So most of the time, that's the way I lean when I go mock drafts. I get one of those dudes, and then I figure it out from there.
All right, guys. Well, this has been fun. 2.5 hours of talking Hawks and getting all these comments in. We've almost got 1,000 people watching us, so it's been a good show. Brandon, tell us what's going on with the Hawksnest coming up.
We got just the normal. We're going through the bye weeks, so just kind of going back through. You got me usually stream 4 or 5 times a week over there in the Hawksnest. So you can find me there Wednesdays, Sundays, normally game days, all that. But just about every day I'm streaming now, just about. So you find me just over there on the Hawksnest on YouTube. That's my main stomping grounds. You locate me at.
Dan, what's going on Seahawks Forever this week?
Got a busy week lined up. Got Max Brown coming back on the show Monday. We're going to talk about this quarterback class and get into that a little bit and talk about how, unfortunately, this is one of those years I look at the class and I think, okay, and we touched on this a little bit earlier in the show, like maybe this is a more layered class because of the lack of consensus and because of the variety in the class. Like maybe there is a day 2, even a day 3 guy there that you could sit on and develop. But those day 2 and day 3 guys get paid to stay in school now. So we're going to talk about that concept a little bit, and that'll be fun. And then follow that up with Rob Staten's going to go on the show. He just put out his first horizontal. He's always ahead of the curve on this stuff a lot more than we are. And I'm going to kind of use that to kick off some of that conversation. And then later in the week, hopefully before the 49ers game, coming back home from a family vacation, we'll get Paul Moyer back on the show as well and get his thoughts. I want to talk to him specifically about that secondary and some of the young players there and what he's seeing there and from this defense moving forward and kind of a mid-season recap from him. So lots coming up.
Yeah, I think, Bryce, there's a good chance this year they do. You're talking about the quarterbacks this year in the Green Bay approach for Schneider. I think there's a very good chance he's been talking about it for years, wanting to draft guys. And I think the reason he hasn't is because that place that he wants to draft 2nd through the 4th round hasn't been as deep a group in recent years. But back to Dan's just point a second ago, this is one of the deepest groups you have. And when you saw the Russell Wilson year where you did this, you had the Cousins, you had Russell Wilson going in the 3rd round. And what did the Hawks do that year? They kept 3 quarterbacks on the active roster with Flynn, Jackson, and Russell Wilson. So maybe they go that route again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Very good chance.
Good points. Yeah, guys, go down and subscribe to their channels, and we got some cool stuff coming up too. And we're just we're all fired up for the second half of the season to kick off and see where this team's going to end up. And at the end of the day, we all love this team. We want them to just compete, and we just want this team to, I don't know, just win as much as we can, and it's gonna win, baby, and all that stuff, and they're gonna get there. I think it's just that's what we do here. We just kind of, you might be a little critical sometimes, but we're here to break it down and sort of just look at all the ins and outs of the squad, and so it's gonna be all good. So I'm looking forward. I can't wait. I can't wait for this Niners game.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Bryce, you mentioned there's up to 1,000 viewers of live stream. That's awesome, especially considering the fact that I know I had some technical difficulties trying to stream it to my site. But so every one of you that's watching this, if you enjoy what you're seeing, subscribe to the Hawkszone Rundown and subscribe to Bryce and Ryan's channel, because if there's 1,000 of you, 1,000 subscribers is a huge deal on YouTube. It's a big threshold for a channel to get over, and they're very close to doing that. They've been doing some great comments. So if all of you get over there and hit that subscribe button for those guys.
Doesn't cost you anything, guys. It's free.
Well, we appreciate the support, guys, and it's been an awesome show. So, guys, that's it for us tonight. We appreciate everyone coming on, guys. We appreciate you, Brandon, Dan, and we will be talking to you guys in the future for sure. Go Hawks!
Thanks for having us.
Go Hawks!
Go Hawks! Thanks for having us.